Hello out there, YouTube land. If anybody's on here already, just let me know if I'm audible and visible, and then we'll just get the ball rolling. So hopefully my upload should actually be in 16:9 this time. My webcam started freaking out the last time and upped it in 4:3 for some reason. So I'm hoping this actually works this time. It looks like we're good. So anyway, this is my second ever live stream, and just going to go through and do some of the new additions for the week and just general discussion about our favorite dead media formats, film history in general, film theory, whatever comes up in the chat box, and talk about Laserdisc, of course, since that's kind of our forte, our big favorite shiny 12-inch disc. So to avoid what happened last time with all the dead air at the beginning, I'm just going to jump right into a couple of the new things I've picked up in the past week, and a little bit of what's going to be coming up in my next Laserdisc video. Just show off one or two of those to give you an idea of what I found. And some people in the group have already seen some of this because I've posted some photos of acquisitions. But I couldn't resist putting this one up as the... oh no, I'll hang on a second till more people come in and go through the DVDs I've turned up. This one, I gotta admit, it's one I'd known of because there's so many Charles Bronson films, and I know Kino Lorber's put it out on Blu-ray, but at 99 cents for a nicely mastered MGM DVD, I couldn't say no. Anyway, this is the Charles Bronson film Assassination. It's the MGM DVD release, and of course, being MGM, it's had 15 different package treatments, and it's the same disc, and it's been put in multi-feature sets with heavy compression. Anyway, this is out from Kino Lorber on Blu-ray, so you can get it in HD if you want, but instead of paying like 20 bucks for a Blu-ray, 99 cents for a DVD is fine sometimes. And the reason why I picked this up, I'm not really a giant Bronson fan, but it was directed by Peter Hunt, most famous for being the editor of the early Bond films and then directing On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And I've been going back, I've been wanting to do, at least a study on all of the other films that the 5 original Bond directors worked on, because most of them really didn't go on to really large careers afterwards. So I've already seen a good number of them, and it's been interesting going back and seeing some of the other Bond directors, what they did after the series. So I'm always excited to see anything Peter Hunt ever did, because I do... Oh, hang on, my dog decided to pull my webcam because I wasn't having enough fun. Anyway, let me try and adjust myself a little bit. My angle got knocked a little, but let's see how this... Let's see if that helps. Okay, that's a little better. Sorry about that. But anyway, I do think Peter Hunt was one of the greatest editors who ever lived. And I think he actually turned out to be a really good director. But unfortunately, like the other 4 of the original 5 Bond directors, he never really went on to do any major Hollywood A-list pictures and stuff. So I'm always interested to see anything he or Terrence Young, Guy Hamilton, Lewis Gilbert, and John Glenn worked on, because I have the utmost respect for them. So there's that. Another DVD I picked up, again, this was literally in the dollar bin and still sealed, so I can't say no. This is another MGM release of the film Bad Influence. Trying to get some, there's no glare. You gotta admit, the cover looks pretty good for an old MGM catalog disc. The reason why I picked this up is I do love the Spader, and so, again, DVDs for 99 cents, especially when they're still sealed, you can't say no. But I didn't realize this was actually written by David Koepp and was directed by Curtis Hanson, most famous for LA Confidential, which is, of course, really great. So I figured this would be a fun watch. Again, Spader really always gives great performances. I think Bravo's pretty underrated, and looks interesting. And again, I didn't know Curtis Hanson made this, and it's got a anamorphic widescreen transfer on here. So. And it does include the trailer, so has a special feature or two. But talking about special features, the one Blu-ray I've picked up, this is one I've meant to pick up for quite some time, and it popped up in the local shop for dirt cheap, for a fraction of what it normally goes for. This is the Shout Factory Collector's Edition reissue of Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13. This is actually a really nice disc. It pretty much takes the old Blu-ray release. I think it was Image that put this out originally, and it's actually pretty good HD master. Of course, this film was shot low budget back in the 70s, and it's never going to look like super great to begin with. I know, it was a low budget film with a mono soundtrack, but the image release was pretty good. Had the new master, but didn't have a lot of features, and so Shout took it and made nice cover art and put some work into getting some really nice special features. So it's definitely one of the better Shout releases. There's not really any major issues with the transfer or anything. And this is one of the discs they've put out that doesn't, have some compression issues. Because a lot of times when these smaller labels put out a Blu-ray title that's already come out for one of the major studios, especially if they're using the same master, sometimes you run into having, they're just not encoded as well. I know, for example, like when you go from the MGM Mad Max Blu-ray for the original 1979 film, and then you go to the Shout Factory one, it's just the compression is not as good, so you're kind of losing some video quality from the MGM one. Anyway, this is a really nice stacked release, and it's one of those where you do get reversible cover art. So let me see if I can slip this out a little bit. So I have to admit, the revised art is really, really nice, but they were nice enough to give you a reversible sleeve with the original artwork. So definitely recommend it. It's definitely the best Blu-ray of this film out there. I'm not the biggest Carpenter fan, but I've been wanting to go back and revisit this. Of course, there's a really great Laserdisc out there, and I've just never come across it because it's not super expensive, but it can go for quite a bit. So this will do until I can find the Laserdisc, and that way I can actually go back and rewatch the film. I don't think I've seen it since I was really a kid. Let's see, we got some comments already. Hey Melinda, how are you? Oh no, don't worry, you're fine. It always takes me a minute to get this thing going anyway. Let's see, 4K Cinema, how are you? Let's see, 4K Cinema says, I'm curious about the director's pan and scan editions of the James Cameron films on Laserdisc, and if there are better alternatives than the widescreen Laserdisc, since Cameron shot those in Super 35, particularly True Lies. Well, that being said, I would really love to check out more of those. That being said, the more I've put into it and I've really looked at it, they used to have the little comparison videos on some of those, or the little inserts for the DVDs that shows, the frame around the entire camera negative and what is the Super 35 one, and then what is the 133 opened up one, and then what would 235 be like, and it tries to show you the difference. It's like, oh, you're losing so much picture. But I think it really kind of varies shot to shot, especially for the Cameron films. I think they work really well in 133. The only thing is I've only seen like T2 and True Lies and some of the others in 133 on old VHS tapes, growing up from, when you rented them or seeing them on television. That being said, I do have the Titanic director's pan and scan Laserdisc, and I took a look at it. The big benefit is you get more resolution because you're using the full advantage of the full NTSC signal, and you're not wasting it with some black letterboxing bars. But that being said, the widescreen version, which I also have, so I finally got two to go side by side. Of course, it just had to be Titanic. It couldn't be True Lies. It couldn't be T2. It could be something that you really like. I'm not a Titanic person. But anyway, I think, if you really like these and you're big on Laserdisc, then yeah, definitely track them down because you're going to get more resolution out of it. And they've never been replicated outside of some of the early flipper DVDs with a full screen transfer on one side that's actually this 133 matting. But the scope formatting is what they were intended for. Visually, in terms of composition, shot composition, and everything. So, with these, it's not as bad as looking at an open matte film. Say for example, if you look at Batman and you look at the early 133 DVD or the VHS tape, and then you compare it to the matted widescreen version, and you can tell it was totally designed for widescreen. And while some shots work, most of them don't. But with the Cameron films, they seem to have done more work in trying to make sure that the 133 transfer didn't lose anything, because most of these open matted transfers, they're like I mentioned on Batman, they could be a mix. I think the 133 Batman 89 is kind of not so good because some things you lose too much information. And then again, the 133 Batman Returns looks great. So it's just one of those things that, you know, if you really like 133, some films really work, and some not so much. But I do think on the Cameron films, the scope format is what was intended. The widescreen was what was intended. But I think if you can find some of those laser discs, you'll be really surprised because you're getting the alternate matting that uses the full NTSC resolution. So yeah, they are definitely cool. And it's kind of interesting to see director's pan and scan edition listed on there. And anyhow, let's see. What do we got now? Subliminal 5 says, hi everyone. Hi, Subliminal 5. Apparently you can see the matte line in the scene in the abyss where the water tentacle comes out of the water. The graphics stop where the matte bar should be. You know, I have to say, I didn't spot that. I've only seen the Abyss a couple times. Like I've said before, I'm not like a giant Cameron fan, and of course, I only have the Abyss on laser, and sometimes it's hard to find minute details when you're, you know, still looking at NTSC resolution. It's not as easy as like a DVD or a Blu-ray. So I'll have to go back and double check that. Was that on the theatrical cut, or was that on the extended version? Do you know? Or is it both, or does it not matter? I'll have to go back and look at that. That aside, the Abyss is still like a benchmark for laser, whether you're talking about, well, I mean, the long version. The theatrical cut's an older disc, but it's still pretty good. But that box set is just fantastic. That sound mix, even the regular surround version, and then, you know, you bump up to the AC3 reissue, it's really, really great. And of course, that's supposed to be coming out in 4K or at least on Blu-ray at some point, along with True Lies. It's, you know, being more and more rumored, but I'm sure it's going to come out and be totally a grain-free teal and orange mess like T2 was. Let's see. Extended edition pan and scan on Laserdisc. Director's pan. Oh, okay. So one of those director's pan and scans. Yeah, then there's probably something visible, because you're saying a lot more. I don't know why he was so fascinated with the with Super 35, and then that kind of led to that and being used in a lot of productions in the 90s. I mean, I know it's technically cheaper because you're supposed to be using less frames. They viewed it as like a successor to Techniscope, which of course was the famous 2-perf system that was, you know, 2 perf frames that were all scope, and then blown up and converted to regular 4-perf frames. So essentially your negative was half the size of a normal negative. That cut your cost in half because you were only having 2 perf frames. But yeah, a lot of films did that, and I know I've read a lot of like cinematography articles from the time period and a lot of discussions with like film handlers and stuff. And I mean, I like some of the ideas of it, and it's kind of more versatile. But of course, it's never, when you're presenting it in scope, it's never going to be quite as sharp as just, you know, if you did standard anamorphic lenses. That being said, I think later on they got a lot better, because I didn't know for the longest time that one of my favorite films was shot Super 35, which is Ronin, and there's some sharpness in there that is just absolutely off the charts. And I think it's really amazing that they shot that in Super 35 and were able to do the sort of Frankenheimer trademark, you know, sharp imagery and deep focus staging of characters and close-ups. And I think a lot of that is probably trying to get the cameras on the car mounts, because it's a lot easier to get complicated setups if you don't have to worry about having anamorphic lenses and stuff when you're still using spherical lenses. Let's see. Matrix falls into that category of looking good in full screen because of Super 35. Yeah, that's another one that was actually shot in Super 35 as well. Yeah. Let's see, which Laserdisc are you talking about? Oh, EDP, we were talking about James Cameron director pen and scan discs like T2, True Lies, Abyss, Titanic and such, you know, talking about the ratio differences and things like that. But yeah, it's actually, Super 35 is still kind of around in some various ways, but a lot of film shoots now, if they want to shoot film to cut on costs, Kodak started making 3-perf instead of 2-perf, and that's a way of cutting costs down, just like the old days of Techniscope. And then some things are actually shot on 16mm and then blown up to 35, and then because the technology's gotten so much better and the film stocks have gotten a lot better, you don't really notice notice the difference like you would back in the old days. Like even a lot of independent films were shooting 16 millimeter right through until the 90s, early 2000s, and then they get blown up to 35, and it'd be like as much as they could, all the money they could scrounge together to get a print made for like film festivals and stuff. And so that's why if you look at Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, that was shot, I think it was shot on Super 16, which is a little bit bigger of a film gauge. And then that was blown up to 35 millimeter. And then that's why it doesn't look so hot and it looks kind of noisy and soft and stuff. That's because it was literally optically blown up. But the difference in tech between then and now, between like 2099 or so, and actually, what Lock, Stock was, what, 98, I think. So like really tail end of the century there to now. Now you can actually go shoot 16 millimeter and either process digitally or blow it up, and now I can get some really interesting, tremendous results. Let's see. I have the letterbox edition, letterbox version of the T2 Special Edition. I hope to find the pan and scan version. Yeah, like I said before, anytime you can find some of these pan and scans, they're definitely harder to find. So it's definitely worth it. And then again, most of them, some of them kind of made it to DVD, like some of the early ones, and they'd be marketed under a full screen presentation on like the side of a flipper disc or something. And but yeah, they're really, really interesting. And again, they haven't been resurrected since. So it's kind of like preserving a part of video history. And of course, it's going to look a lot better than it would on tape, because the first way I saw T2 was on VHS, and I was like, I mean, this is really cool and everything, but it's kind of hard to watch because it doesn't look so good because it's on VHS. And then of course, I saw it much later on other formats, so I'm like, oh, okay, this is a lot better. That's one of those I think that really starts to push VHS. It's a really good tape release, but at least from what I remember. But I remember renting it and thinking, like, I think the effects could look a lot better if I wasn't watching on tape. Wasn't Leaving Las Vegas shot that way and blown up on 35? Yeah, that was a I think that was, I can't remember if it was 16 or Super 16 was one of those, and then it was blown up to 35. And of course that was really the the indie low budget method of choice because that's all you can afford. And there is a an artistic sensibility to that. You can do a lot of work that's sort of more what would be considered the old cinema verite, or getting out there on the streets with handheld cameras. And so the intensified grain and softness inherent, I think it works for that film, and I think it can really lend a sensibility to it. But now with everything being a lot better, it's now become kind of a thing to go shoot on 16 millimeter again. And I'm like, well, I never thought that would happen again. The thing I'm glad that isn't around anymore is when everybody started using digital video, and like especially the Dogman 95 guys and that whole movement, they go shoot like with DV cams and high 8 cams. And I don't know if any of you had much experience with that stuff and the look of that. And then they would get that transferred to film and blown up to a 35 millimeter print and shown at festivals. And that stuff just it's so bad. It looks terrible. I get the intent, but just, imagine your old DV camcorder from back in the early 2000s or late 90s, or high 8 or whatever you're using. And imagine that blown up to a film print. Yeah, I'm glad that's gone. So yeah, it's just really interesting to see that some of this stuff is actually starting to come back. I know Kodak's talking about they've actually developed a new Super 8 camera they're going to start selling, and it's the old plastic style Super 8 camera with the handle and the trigger and everything, except this one's going to come with little like prepackaged loads of film, and you're literally going to buy these and just slot it in, and then you can go around and shoot your whole 8 millimeter cartridge load, and then just mail it to Kodak. They'll develop it and then send you back a digital file, and or I think I would guess to develop film. But apparently they've had so many requests for Super 8 that Super 8 cameras and camcorders, like you had back in the 50s and 60s and 70s into the 80s, that now that's apparently becoming a thing, just like the resurgence of Polaroid cameras. So that's been really interesting to see. I've seen a bunch of people walking around with Polaroids actually pretty recently, and I'm like, I had heard that, but I didn't know it was that widespread. So apparently Super 8 is making a comeback too. So let me go through some. Let me see some of the well, at least one or two new arrival Laserdiscs. Sorry, I'm trying to take this out of the sleeve. This is one that's going to be in my next video, and I made this the cover shot for this just because I think the cover is so fantastic. It's pretty hard to come by, and I'm sure the transfer. I mean, it may be different than the regular one. I haven't got a chance to compare them yet, but it's listed as being, director approved. But I know it has some interesting special features, and it's just gorgeously packaged, and I'm so happy to have it. This is the Criterion Laserdisc of The English Patient. Just absolutely gorgeous artwork there. That's why I couldn't resist, putting it in here and using it for the cover shot. I mean, this is easily one of the best Laserdisc jackets I've ever seen. It's just really well done. And, the regular one looks really nice, and it uses the poster artwork that was around at the time, but it's sort of like a 90s floating head style. And this one just nails it. It's just fantastic. Let me show you the gatefold really quick. And like I said, I'm going to go over this more in my next video. So this just give you an idea of some of what I've been perusing and picking up on disc recently. But yeah, this is one of the more modern style special editions that Criterion was doing about this time in the mid to late 90s. This is just a wonderful, wonderful package. I think pretty much all the special features have made it over to the Blu-ray, but this is the one edition of this film where you can really tell some attention to detail and care went into it, because it's under Miramax, and the regular Laserdisc, the DVD, and the Blu-ray are all, pretty much standard, no booklets or special anything. So this is just really, really nice. And it's one of the few Criterions with the THX stamp, and it does have Dolby AC3. So I'm gonna have to compare this to the standard one you can get for dirt cheap. But the packaging on this is fantastic. This is one of those I can pull out and be like, this is one of the main reasons why I really got hooked on collecting these, because I like to go back to this every once in a while because you kind of forget about it. But just wonderfully done. One of those nice, more modern Criterions, and does have the original director approved transfer sticker. So there's Anthony Minghella's printed signature on there. I wish Criterion would bring this back. It's such a little thing, but I've always loved this, and it's so rare to come across copies with this still intact. So just wanted to show that one off a little bit. It's really, really nice. I definitely recommend it, even though it is a bit pricey. That was courtesy of Mike Dog from the Facebook group and his posting of Criterions. I bought a number of them, and some of the ones I've been looking for a while. Let's see what we got on the comments. Let's see. Hi, Elvin. Thanks for coming in. Let's see. Oh yeah, it's a beautiful copy. I gotta say, Rickshaw. Yeah. It's really something. I thought it looked nice on the eBay pictures I've seen of it before on the Laserdisc database, but yeah, it's one of those when you get it in your hands, you're like, wow, this is really, really nice. Yes, it's very Lawrence of Arabia reminiscent, and you do get that vibe, but it's totally its own thing, and the title font is very minimalist. It's just beautiful. We do a Planet of the Apes Laserdisc overview. To be honest, I'd kind of like to, but I actually don't have any of the Ape series, as much as it pains me to say that. I absolutely love all 5 of the original films, but the reason why I never picked them up, I started really looking for them, and they're just standard Fox discs, at least the US ones, but for some reason, they're just harder to come by and usually go for higher prices and stuff. And but the reason why I kind of backed off on that is I thought they would have their original mono tracks, which were kind of not on any other releases, and they're all stereoized mixes from Chase Audio. And while I'm sure those are fine, I'm such a purist that kind of made me go, well, maybe I don't want to pick these up, because they can go for like $15 a pop sometimes. Then there's the Japanese box set that's, super crazy rare, and a lot of people have spent a lot of time and effort to track one down, and they're really, really nice, really, really pretty. And they have it has the uncut long version of Battle for the Planet of the Apes, which for a long time that was the only way you could see that. I think that's the only one where it has the long version, because Conquest didn't get the original ending put back on until the Blu-ray. But the long version of Battle is now out on Blu-ray, and you can get the Blu-ray for literally a couple bucks. You can get the whole set for a couple bucks. And none of those have original mono tracks. They're all stereo. And then there was a final run of THX discs that were then replicated on the first THX DVDs in that box set. And you can get that box set for literally a couple bucks. And the AC3 THX lasers are super expensive and still don't have the original mono tracks. So if I ever come across any, I'm definitely going to actually pick them up if they're actually cheap. But like I said, they usually go for a lot. And since you can get the Blu-rays with the uncut Battle and most importantly the uncut Conquest with the original ending, and they're listed as having mono tracks, but they're really like a down mix of the 5.1. But actually I think I've got it right here. I've wanted to pick up the lasers for a long time, but I got spoiled because I picked up the slimmed down Apes box a couple years ago, and you can still get this guy for literally like I've seen it go for like $5 or $10. And if any Apes fans are out there, this is absolutely a must. You can now get it with the some of the modern films included in like a set. They're just all single Blu-ray platters. And again, they list mono, but they're mono down mixes of the 5.1. But for the cost of this, and you get exclusive HD extras and stuff, and the transfers are pretty good. That's why I haven't picked up any Laserdiscs yet, because none of them have the original mono, and they're all super pricey. But they're supposed to be doing 4K work on the Ape series, so at some point, the whole series was supposed to debut in 4K somewhere. But of course, that was Fox, and now that Fox is under Disney, there's no telling what's happening with that. So that's another reason why I wanted to kind of hold off a bit. I always look for them, but that's kind of where I am on POTA at the moment. I know that was kind of a long-winded answer. I hope that helps. Let's see. That is one of those films you have to be in the mood for. If you're talking about English Patient, yes, absolutely. Let's see. Elvin says, "Do you have any Chaplin, Keaton, or Lloyd Laserdisc?" I've nearly gotten some before. And especially with early silent films, you have to be very careful because they started coming out during the analog only era, and since so many films have had multiple restorations with footage reincorporated and cuts restored and things, a lot of older Laserdiscs will still be missing bits and pieces, or they'll be based on older restorations, or they'll have different scores and stuff. So anytime I go for any of the classic silent comedians or the silent clowns, basically, or anything silent, I sit there and I try to coordinate with some of the reviews on silentera.com and try and go back and figure out where it came from, try and figure out if it's complete, if it's supposed to be color tinted and all that stuff. With Chaplin, I think most of the Laserdiscs are under the I always forget the banner. It was the same releases that they put out on VHS, where they went in and did some basic cleanup work on all of them. That was the first way I saw the Gold Rush, and that was actually it's like the re-release version, I think, from the early 40s, where Chaplin went in and added sound effects and some dialogue and cut it in a couple places. So I think for Keaton and Chaplin and Lloyd especially, you're much better served with a lot of the newer restorations, because they have better materials, and they're usually they'll have cuts restored and things, and have proper timing and scores and tons of extras. Of course, Criterion's done a number of Chaplin, and they've done a number of Lloyd. I think there's another Lloyd title they're supposed to release this year, and the Lloyd titles look really, really amazing, because those have not had as many revisits as Chaplin and Keaton. And then Keaton is out on Kino Lorber releases, and they're in the process of redoing with a number of those. So it basically varies. I've nearly gotten some before, but I try and hold out and figure out which one is the best overall release. I think the only one I have the MGM double feature of Keaton. I think it's Saphead and something else. I can't remember off the top of my head which titles they are, but it's the one from the MGM Silent Classics line where they did. It was mostly double features. They did like I think 5 or 10 of those, and that one I do have because it has nice digital sound, and it was pretty much the same as what they later put out on DVD. But yeah, that's the only one I really have currently on Laserdisc. Let's see. I have the book cover Blu-ray set of Apes. Oh yeah, yeah. I remember when that thing came out, and I was drooling over it. I've seen it come up every once in a while. I've nearly wanted to get it just for the book, but that was one of those where they had the like foam disc hubs, so a lot of people got damaged, defective Blu-rays, and they eventually came out with this slimmed down one, and that's why I went with that. Plus, it saves on shelf space. But yeah, that book is really, really nice. Let's see. They're coming out with Criterion Channel April the 8th at $99 a year. Yeah, I didn't know it was that close. Wow, that's pretty cool. I think that's going to be a big help because, you know, the with Filmstruck going down, that was a big blow to a lot of people because that had become like the hub for classic movie lovers and art house and everything online, especially because they had partnered with Warner Archive. So now, if I'm not mistaken, I think that this is just Criterion by itself, and Warner's still separate, but they may eventually join forces with other people again. My thing is I'm not really a streaming person, and I mean, I hope it really goes well because there needs to be something out there. I'm glad they got something up, and I'm surprised it was this quick. So that's really good. I'm sure there's going to be some growing pains for the first couple months, just like anything. So yeah, I mean, I'm glad they're back. I'm glad there's another outlet. Get some water. I'm getting parched already. It's amazing how dry your throat gets when you start doing these. I've got a couple more this guy had set aside to show just some of the ones I picked up. I just got pretty lucky. I picked up, I go through dry spells all the time, and then it's like, okay, one here, one there, and then you find one at a thrift shop for, you know, $1 or $2, and you're like, do I really need this? Well, there hasn't been anything in a while. And then like the next week you find like 15 discs in a store, and then there's a group sale and you get another 10, and then there's 10 here, and then 6 months of nothing. It just goes back and forth. So this is one I wanted to find for a while. It's not rare or anything, but it doesn't come up very often. This is the Universal Letterbox release of the Western Lonely of the Brave. This is one of, I know Kirk Douglas says this is his favorite film performance, and it's a really, really great film that doesn't get talked about enough. It's definitely one of the earlier examples of a postmodernist or revisionist Western, I'd argue, because it's from 1962. So really nice little Universal release, and it actually has a, these are all, this is just basically a letter from Kirk Douglas himself talking about the film and how much he remembers doing it and how much he loved it and wanted to do it badly. So it's a lot nicer than your standard Universal release. So really, really nice little disc. Definitely recommend it if you come across it. Let's see. I want to see movie TV cuts of films on Blu-ray, like what they did for Superman. Example, King Kong, 3-hour version, and I guess the 76 one, and the TV cut of The Warriors. Excuse me. Yeah, the Superman is still shocking. I'm still flabbergasted that ever happened. And, you know, they actually found it and did a transfer of the element in widescreen, and it was complete. And it had the original, you know, pretty much it was a mono mix, and Warner Archive just put it out there. And I know they weren't expecting the like insane level of response they got. So I know that's made them want to go back, and I know there's some talk about putting out the television version of Superman 2, which will be really, really big because, you know, those films were shot back to back, and there's so much extra material that's, you know, either never seen the light of day or has only come up in snippets or TV edits, and there were so many fan attempts to preserve some of that stuff that's really, really important. But it's going to be a matter of convincing studios to do this stuff, and it's been more of the smaller labels when they go and put out a release, you know, to make some bonus features, they want to try and find some of this additional footage and stuff. Um, and then the additional footage and things that were like shot for television airings, or I know there's going to be a reissue of Earthquake, and I think they're supposed to include some of the additionally shot for television footage that really has nothing to do with the movie, but they just used it to pad out the time. The one that still gets me is I'm amazed they managed to dig up the network intro for Fistful of Dollars. And that was due to a fan. I think he taped it on beta or something back in the day, and they managed to, you know, resurrect that and then put it on all of the DVD and Blu-ray releases later on. So the stuff is out there. It's just a matter of, just like everything, convincing studios or having somebody in charge of the video department or the particular release that actually is, you know, trying their darndest to get this stuff out there. I know the Warriors has had a lot of trouble over the years because there's the original cut, there's a director's cut. I think the original cut is now like kind of MIA, and you pretty much are stuck with the director's cut, at least if I'm remembering that correctly. And yeah, I had forgotten there's a TV version of that too. Let's see, what is your holy grail Laserdisc in your collection? Well, that's kind of a open-ended question, because there's like personal ones, and then there's like, you know, the super rare ones. I do have a good number of rare titles. I managed to finally get the first 4 volumes of the Golden Age of Looney Tunes. That was really big. And if I can ever get the 5th one and complete the set, that'll be really huge. So the 5th one's definitely one of my grails to look for now, because it's so rare and expensive. My overall grail, period, the one I've been dying to get ever since I got into this, is The Japanese World Is Not Enough. And I actually just posted to the group today, I almost won it in an auction on eBay this morning. There was one in the UK, and I was so excited because there weren't a lot of bidders on it, and didn't have the Obi strip or anything, but it was a really good price, even with the shipping over here, because those things normally go for at least a couple $100, because it's one of those crazy rare exclusive Japanese late releases. And then at the last second, a bunch of people swooped in, and it went from being like, you know, $60 to, you know, 150, 200, and I'm like, well, I was close. Like for 14 seconds, I was there. But in terms of ones I actually own, it would probably be, you know, in terms of rarity, it'd be Looney Tunes 1 through 4. In terms of importance, the most important would be the AC3 reissue of The Alamo, the box set version of the long version of, well, the roadshow version of The Alamo, the only film John Wayne ever directed. And it was thought lost for years. They finally found a large format 70mm print of the long version. It's the only one in the world that exists. MGM transferred it to Laserdisc, like they did when they did the first attempt at reconstructing the long It's a Mad World. And then they reissued it in about '98, added an AC3 track, and they've never released it since. They put out a DVD of the short version, and they've let the one print of the long version of The Alamo rot, and people have been trying to petition them to restore it for years. So that's a super important Laserdisc, because now that one print is, you know, pretty much everybody thinks it's totally gone in terms of savability, or it's going to take a hell of a lot of money to properly restore it now, because of all the years of neglect and negligence. So yeah, that's probably the one I always wanted to find. That's, you know, super rare, and I just got extremely lucky. It was because somebody's estate sale had taken all their massive lifelong collection of movies of all formats, and taken it to one of the local record stores, and they just had a day where they opened a whole side room, because there were just thousands and thousands of titles, mostly DVDs, like 8,000 DVDs, like 2,000 Blu-rays, couple thousand VHS tapes, and then about, you know, 750 Laserdiscs, most of which were sealed. I mean, it was like one of those, you know, you feel like you stepped in a video store back in the day. You know, you felt like you stepped in a Suncoast or a Media Play warehouse. It was amazing. And I walked right in, and it was just sitting right there, and I'm like, I can't believe this. So that's the grail I own in terms of rarity. For personal reasons, my ultimate grail that I own, is what I started out this whole format for, was the Bond films and Star Wars. So if I had to say my own personal favorite, it would be my Technodisc Star Wars, the Technodisc pressing of the Fox Special Widescreen Edition with the regular Fox widescreen Empire and Jedi. And I only have one of the Japanese Special Collection discs because they're super expensive. So I have the JSC of Star Wars, and that's also great. I kind of group all those together. And then I've managed to complete the run of regular Letterbox US Bond titles. So all of the Letterbox series, the THX run of the remastered discs, and then the CAV boxes for Goldfinger and Thunderball. So those are my personal grails out of what I've collected. Not super rare or anything, but that's how I got started, and that's all I was originally intending to collect in the first place. I bought all those when the all 5 volumes in the 90s of Looney Tunes. Wow, good for you, man. That's I'm sure you paid a good amount for them back then, and they're still important today, and they're still worth a good amount. And definitely your box 5 has gone up in value if you bought that when it came out. Good for you, because I know they didn't even print too many of those. That's why it's so expensive. Oh, you actually have the Twine Japanese Laserdisc. Double good for you. Oh, I have to say that, yeah, I'm very envious. That said, I was happy to finally review it in my Japanese Bond review video I posted. Peter Biancardi very, very graciously loaned me that, along with some other Japanese Bond discs to check out. And it's a fantastic disc. But that being said, I've never been able to justify the high cost because it's so close to that first DVD. It's one of those where it's like I put them side by side, I toggled back and forth, and I kept wanting to say the Japanese Laserdisc was so good that you just had to plunk down $200 for one. But I'm like, this is where DVD is really starting to outstrip the Laserdisc in terms of you can get the special edition DVD from the same master for literally 50 cents in most used shops and stuff. You can buy it for $2 or $3 on eBay. But I still hope one day to have that. How does the Patton AC3 disc sound? They used the 70mm track for that release. They're supposed to have, and it does have sound panning and dialogue panning in it. I know a lot of some of the other releases were supposed to have taken that out, and I've heard that the remastered Blu-ray, the one after the DNR fiasco of the first one, where it was so DNR'd that everybody had wax faces, and they finally, thankfully, recalled that awful disc. It was one of those early terrible Blu-rays. But I've got to pick up the remastered disc because it's supposed to have the original audio mix in HD. But I did manage to pick up the Laserdisc with AC3 reissue, and it actually says on there, it's from the 70mm source tracks. That's one film I would love to see on the big screen, but of course it was designed for Dimension 150, which was had special lenses, and it was a deeply curved screen that it projected onto. And there's some really great articles online about the process, but it was only used for Patton, and I want to say like one other feature film and then some like more documentary things. So it was only used like 2 or 3 times, but you can see the pictures of the curved screen installations, and I mean they're just, it's like, wow, it's not quite the deep curve of like 3-panel Cinerama with the super deep wraparound curve, but this one, it was a totally different angle system. So I can't even imagine what it was like seeing Patton in Dimension 150 back then with full 6-track mag audio from 70mm prints. So hopefully one day that's possible to see somewhere. But it's one of those where it was only used 2 or 3 times, so I don't know if that's ever going to be possible to see that way again. Oh, thanks, Elvin. I try to be informative. Most of this stuff's floating around in my head, and I just was like, if I'm going to try and relate this to somebody who can actually understand me, besides, I drive my family members and coworkers and anybody crazy with this stuff. If anything gets brought up, I'm like, hey, did you know on the AC3 Laserdisc of such and such, it uses the da-da-da-da-da-da, and then they just, the eyes roll back in their head, and I'm like, yeah, never mind, I'm speaking another language. So I'm happy this stuff is helpful. the trouble. It's just most people don't take the time to do any research, or and then especially studios. A lot of the divisions are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, with the whole notion of we think physical media is dying and streaming's the thing, and it all needs to be as simple as possible, and the lack of research on audio mixes and transfer strengths and stuff. It's really doing people a disservice, and ultimately it hurts the films themselves. So I started for a couple things, and I thought it was just every once in a while something might be a bit screwy, or something might be messed up or something, and then one horrible day you realize it's not the exception. It's pretty much the rule, that you really have to research almost every single title. Even if you think it's fine, it might not be fine somehow. Melinda says, do you collect anything other than physical media? Any other hobbies? Yeah, I collect too much, probably. It's pretty much all media related. I've been a book collector since I was a kid. I still collect for a few various series and stuff. I pretty much started collecting with the Bond novels, the original Ian Fleming James Bond novels, and then the continuation novels, and we're up to almost about, it's like I think 46 or 47 Bond novels in all, if you count all the continuations. And then I've been collecting Hardy Boys ever since I was a kid, and that's still ongoing, because there's so many different editions, cover arts, original text, revised text, and stuff. And I kind of dabble in a few other series, but mostly I just collect film books, because I read too many film books, and I'm always trying to find more film books. Everything always goes back to the same thing. It's always film related. And then I do collect music. I got into record collecting pretty young, and that's kind of, I think, what led me into questioning video transfers and stuff, because some of the first records I picked up, I was like, why do these sound so different? And then I learned about remixing and remastering, and then the loudness wars and all that stuff. I still buy CDs. I still buy just as much as I do records. I'm not exclusive or anything. With music, same thing as video. I try to find the best, most original mastering of something. I'm just trying to find like the best sounding release of something. And actually, that's something I started to think about, in addition to just doing Laserdisc. If I started doing some uploads about, records I picked up, and, pressing differences and comparisons and stuff. I don't know if that'd be of interest of any of you guys. If you think that's something you'd like, definitely, let me know below. But those are pretty much the collections I'm kind of involved in, and as you can see, I really don't have much space for anything else. I kind of dabble in video games, as you can see some of my old PS2, PS3, PS4 games. I'm not like a hardcore gamer or anything, but there are some types that I like, and I usually kind of come to games once they've been out for a while and get a little cheaper and stuff. But that's pretty much it. Pretty much all of my hobbies somehow tie back to film and motion pictures somehow, because it's my life's obsession. So I know I got started mostly in record collecting and music collecting simply for soundtracks, and soundtrack collecting in and of itself is a whole hobby, just trying to track down all the various releases and complete scores and re-recordings and all the specialty soundtrack labels, which are just doing fantastic work. The only trouble is you can't afford most of their releases because they're all small labels. But yeah, soundtrack collecting has really exploded. There's so many great labels now out there. So let's see. I agree with Elvin. Your videos are great. I've taken so many notes on your videos. Thanks. Yeah, glad to be of service. Hopefully, it doesn't seem too much like taking notes during a lecture or class or something. But yeah, one tries to be as informative as possible. Like I said before, all this stuff just gets stuck in my head, and then I have to get it out somehow. Let's see, is there a specific website for what original audio mixes are used for the home video releases? No, there really isn't. It's just, it's you can try and figure out what format it carries. Like if it's like you can go to Blu-ray.com and look up, what audio tracks releases carry, just like you can look at the Laserdisc database and see what audio tracks it has. But in terms of trying to figure out if it has the original audio, really all you can do is look and see, okay, well, was this film originally in mono? Is it from the classic era? And then you're looking to see, does it have a mono track or a 1.0 or 2.0 track, and then vice versa for 5.1 films, 7.1 films and stuff. But outside of that, you have to literally just go and examine the tracks and then compare it to other releases. And of course, the best way to compare is actually getting a fresh screening in like an art house or rep theater of a print of something, or if it's only available on DCP or whatever, and then but of course most DCPs may not have original audio or carry remixes and stuff. But yeah, it's really just trying to figure out what the original track was, checking the codecs and the audio tracks on each individual release, and then after that, it's just that's where you get into detective work. Most things from like the classic Hollywood period, the whole mono era is pretty good unless they go and remix it and drop the mono. The trouble with those is though, a lot of newer releases get a little bit too overzealous in their noise reduction and cleanup and stuff. So there's even some really great HD restorations that the old Laserdisc audio track or older tracks sound better, even though they're noisier, because they have more of the original recording still there, because with the digital tools, they've gotten a little bit heavy-handed in like noise reduction and tape hiss reduction and stuff. So again, it's detective work. That's what it comes down to. Some water. Alvin asks, who would you like to see as the next Bond in your opinion? Well, my go-to answer for years and still is Jason Isaacs. Jason Isaacs, as the day is long, I think he could really knock it out of the park. But of course, you would need a good director and a good script, and actually, a good interpretation of the character, which I think all of those have been sorely lacking in the modern films. And I think they're really trying to struggle to, they're really having to struggle to try and reclaim a foothold and and establish Bond in the modern era, because the gap between films is getting longer and longer. They've been having to jump between different studios and stuff, so there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that's made it difficult to maintain that. And I know Craig's tenure is starting to get to where it's in the end of his contract, so they're like, we're going to try and get this one out, and then, is it going to be somebody else? Are they going to try and stick with him for a while? But I think the problem is that they usually, at least in the modern era, they go with they want to find young, fresher faces, which is understandable. But I don't think you can go too young. Bond needs to have some experience, and with Casino Royale 06, they wanted to go for the gritty reboot and everything. In my opinion, though, they rebooted too much and they kind of removed the character entirely. Because if you read Casino Royale, Bond is pretty much there. Of course, Bond of the books is totally different to Bond of the films for the most part, in terms of tone. For those who have never read any of Fleming's original works, but in Casino Royale, the novel, the character is still there. It's not like he's just a kid wandering around and gets hurt and screws up, and that suddenly makes him the character everybody knows. It's like it's almost fully formed in the first novel, and over the course of the first novel story, that formalizes everything, and then starting in book 2, Live and Let Die, we can then go off with the character fully formed. And that's why Casino Royale is such a great novel, because the arc of the story actually totally finalizes the character. So there's just so many different variables. I know Jason Isaacs would be deemed too old now. I've had this discussion on several Bond forums before, and I can totally see what they mean. I still think he can do it, no problem. I think a lot of people put too much stock in actors being too old. Like, everybody gives A View to a Kill a lot of crap and flack because Roger was 57 at the time. But he still handles himself very well, especially if you look very closely at everything. But of course, that is pushing it a bit. So I'm just afraid they're gonna, go with somebody again who's on the younger side and more of a fresher face. And I just, I mean, there's several candidates out there. The easiest one would be Michael Fassbender, who, if you look at X-Men First Class, I mean, there's so many scenes in that because it's set in the 1960s. It's like, is this his Bond audition? Like when he walks into the bar in South America and he's tracking down these Nazi fugitives. It's like, this totally seems like a Bond screen test. Like just down to some of the movements and everything. So that Fassbender would be the easiest suggestion because he's well known. He's an established presence, established star actor, and I honestly think depending on the right script and director and tone and everything, I think he could do it. But yeah, for me, it's still Jason Isaacs. Then again, I still think if we really went for like ultimate fan credit and said, reality be damned, Timothy Dalton could still do it. He still has it. He's always had it. That's like my fan pipe dream. I don't care if Bond has to be completely geriatric and has to be, in a mobility scooter or something, he could still do it. I mean, good grief, he's never. I don't think Dalton's ever. I don't even think he even knows the concept of phoning it in. So that's like my ultra fan pipe dream. And of course, Brosnan still has it. And he was sent home packing far too early. He should have had his fifth huzzah. But anyway, moving on. I got some extra comments in here. Yeah, 2 Bond movies in a decade. Yeah, that's a little not so good. Most people don't realize all of the turmoil that's been going on, with the industry being totally different and having to hodgepodge around between, the last vestiges of MGM UA and then the last vestiges of MGM, and then Sony distributes and then Fox distributes. It's just been, and now we're at Universal for Bond 25, which has now just started shooting. So yeah, it's just going to be, it's just been really odd. So I guess we'll have to wait and see what they actually come up with. All right, let's see. 4K says, Arrow uses a lot of the original audio mixes for their Blu-ray releases. I really love Arrow and Arrow Academy. Oh, yes, absolutely. I remember when they announced Ronin coming out, I was so excited because Ronin is one of my all-time favorite films. I can go on about it for years and have done so. But when I actually got the Blu-ray, I wrote up a little review for my written blog, and I always would write a little like tech specs thing, and I'd compare it to other video versions. And there's a 2.0 track on there, and I was like, I wonder if this is basically the same as the SR 2.0 from the theatrical release and the 2.0 in the Laserdisc, which. That's one I've still never gotten, and it kills me. I don't really have a need for it, but I'd still love to get the Ronin Laserdisc. I have every other format, and I'd really love to get the DTS Laserdisc, but again, both kind of later releases, and I still have not managed to find them yet. But I actually wrote them out of curiosity. I didn't think they'd respond, but I wrote them and asked them about the transfer, and then if the 2.0 was the original Matrix mix, and they wrote me a really nice response and said that yes, indeed, it was, and the cinematographer supervised the transfer, and they tried to. My big question, besides the 2.0, was did they try and reflect how the bleach bypass prints looked, because Ronin got a number of bleach bypass prints made. Bleach bypass. It's kind of tongue twister there, because after 7 came out, that became really popular, just like Super 35 did after Cameron used it. And Frank and I had used it a couple times and really loved it. And he started using. There was a couple more advanced versions that came out later on, and a lot of films used it in the very late 90s, early 2000s, before film was being thrown out the door. And they said they really tried to get a feel of both the bleach bypass. I think it's the process they used was called CCE. Each film developing company had their own variant, and it had a like you could control the level of bleach bypass and silver retention, and the level of contrast. You could literally dial it in for different reels and try and control it. and compared to regular prints and stuff. So that's why it looks different. And of course, it's from a 4K scan. And I think Arrow's really been leading the charge on doing 4K scans. Most people will just license the title and then just put out whatever the studio gives them. But I think since Arrow really kind of picked up the ball and started running with it on a lot of these catalog releases, doing their own 4K scans, it's got a lot better, and a lot of people have followed suit, even a lot of the smaller labels. And of course, ironically, of all people to do the first like boutique UHD release, Kino is now going to come out with Hannibal on 4K UHD, which is going to be the first UHD from a non-major studio. So at least it's now finally here. So Elvin asks, do you have any Hammer movies on Blu-ray? I have a number of them, but if you know anything about Hammer, it's never easy to collect them on video because there's all kinds of differences in ratio, transfer, color timing, original sound mixes. And then most of the Hammer restorations are, of course, done in the UK and Europe and only come out over there. And that started in like 2007, 2010 or so. And it's only now that they're starting to come out, or at least a number more have been announced of the actual restored ones. Scream Factory's done a couple. I have their Prince of Darkness, the Dracula Prince of Darkness one, and I have some of the Warner Brothers ones done. They put out the first set of Dracula's Risen from the Grave. Then it was The Mummy, which was a port of the UK restoration, which is great. And then the other two were Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, and I think the fourth one was Taste the Blood of Dracula. There we go. And those are really great. All the Warner ones are really nice upgrades, and like mostly new 2K scans. The Mummy was from the British one. And I do have the new Warner Archive Horror of Dracula, which is a major improvement over the British one. They fixed the color timing problem, but unfortunately they didn't have another element to use. So they just took the British one, fixed the color, but some of the black levels kind of got a little fudged. So it looks great, but there's a lot of black crush going on, especially in the edges. So it's great. The audio is great, but it's not perfect. It's got its own problems, but I still prefer it to the British one because I hated the blue teal recoloring on the British Blu-ray. And of course, both have the Dracula title, and I still like the US Horror of Dracula title, so I'm kind of mad that that's gone. But hopefully somebody can really get it right one of these days. But the problem is, elements haven't been there. Curse of Frankenstein, Warner's been working on for years. I think Warner Archive just finally bit the bullet and did that to get Horror of Dracula out on Blu-ray in the States because it's been so requested. And they were supposed to do another, they're still supposed to do a Hammer Volume 2 of other Warner-owned Hammer titles. But I think they may have given up on that because Warner Archive has put out Dracula AD 1972 and Satanic Rites of Dracula finally. Which are really nice Blu-rays, and then Scream Factory's doing a couple more, some that have already come out over in the UK, like The Witches, and they're doing some of the Quatermass films and stuff, and they've announced they're going to do Legend of the Seven Gold Vampires, and so at least they're finally coming out, but you're going to have to pay more Scream Factory style prices to actually get some of these. So it's getting better, but there's still a number of Hammer titles that still have issues, like the Universal box set has some ratio issues. Some of them are cropped to 2.0 to 1 because apparently somebody thought that's the way they were originally shown. And apparently they were at some points, but it's way too overcropped. And so I can't really stand that set because the HD masters, for the most part, are pretty good, just like what was on the Universal DVD set, with one exception. But unfortunately, the ratios are all screwed up. So you have to go track down the out-of-print European Blu-rays that came out first with the correct ratios. And then, of course, most Hammer European Blu-rays have extra special features that aren't on the US ones. So just like always, you got to sit there and do tons of detective work, just like you did with Hammer on Laserdisc, Hammer disc on tape, Hammer titles on tape, and DVD and such. So the fun has not stopped. There's a really great thread on Blu-ray.com that details the Hammer releases. I think it's like Hammer Films on Blu-ray Thread or something. So if you need any assistance, check that out. They usually update it pretty regularly. I know I've posted in there a bunch. And there's a ton of pages on the various releases, especially Horror of Dracula and the new Warner Archive release. Hopefully, yeah, okay, yeah, no problem. Yeah, I know it's kind of long-winded, but Hammer is not easy to discuss. Unfortunately, not outside of the Anchor Bay image Laserdiscs of Hammer, most of the Hammer titles on Laserdisc are not super great. They're mostly pan and scan stuff, but it's helpful to pick up for, you know, transfer differences, color differences, or you know, PCM mono tracks and stuff. So anytime I find one, I pick them up. I'm just hoping Curse of Frankenstein happens, because the only good element was put out on Blu-ray in the UK, and it's really soft. It's the same from the old crummy DVD, and you know, a lot of people hated it, but you know, that's the best we have now. And Warner's still apparently trying to get a better source together. So let's see. 4K says the cult horror film Maniac from the 80s. 4K restoration from the original 16mm negative is great from Blue Underground. The 35mm blow up can finally rest. Yeah, that's the advent of technology right there. You know, things that we thought we were stuck with. You know, they've actually been able to go back to sources that were perhaps not so great, and there's so much more you can pull out from a scan today than you could back then. And with digital tools, you know, you can actually get in there and you know, remove inherent damage and stuff. So digital is great if used properly, and the trouble is, you know, people don't want to, you know, pony up and pay for stuff and do stuff the right way every single time, because, you know, it takes time, effort, and money and manpower. But you know, definitely the potential is there. I know a lot of fan restorations and fan efforts, you know, the availability of technology and cost reduction and size reduction and everything, with everything becoming more available, a lot of fan efforts have really skyrocketed in terms of quality and what you're able to do. I've been on originaltrilogy.com like for literally ever, and just I'm still amazed at, you know, the differences we've seen, you know, going from trying to capture old VHS and beta tapes and stuff and try and clean them up to you know, getting to DVD resolution and HD resolution and beyond, simply because you know, because the tech is more available and everything's getting cheaper. So I'm still amazed at some of the stuff that's coming out. The only trouble is, you know, it's great, but it can be a lot better, and it's not that hard to do. You know, if CBS goes out and spends $12 million restoring all of Star Trek Next Generation frame by frame, and you know, going back and finding every single scrap of original negative, and then recreating all of the special effects that were shot on standard def tape in the digital realm with like 100% faithfulness, and does all this, does audio remixes for every single episode, includes the original audio tracks as well, does all this stuff, you know, it's definitely doable. And that's just one example. I just thought of it because I'm seeing it off the back of my head. And if you guys have not seen this Blu-ray set, it is absolutely fantastic. This is the UK one. It's region free. You can literally get it for about $50 online, whether it's eBay or, you know, when it goes on sale on Amazon UK. This is one of the best Blu-ray sets out there, and you can get it for dirt cheap compared to the individual season releases. Some really fantastic quality on here, even though, of course, it's you know, a show that was shot 1:3:3, but all of the non-special effects scenes, all the interiors are film, and they're brand new negative transfers. I mean, it's just some fantastic work done on that. But yeah, that should be the level of dedication that should be, you know, given to every title, and unfortunately isn't. So that's what, you know, we'd all like everything to be at, the level of quality and stuff, but unfortunately sometimes even with the best of intentions, it doesn't quite get there. Another example is, I'm just pulling this up because it's something I can talk about, and it's right behind me. This is the Arrow limited release of The Apartment. There's a whole rush to get one of these because there was a pressing shortage for a while. And this was to replace the old MGM Blu-ray, which was just an old HD master that wasn't super great and had a stretching problem. And this is one of Arrow's like really gorgeous limited sets, custom artwork, a custom booklet and everything. And of course, these sold out like super fast. I had to wait months to actually get one because there was a big shortage and Amazon messed up. And so a lot of people's pre-orders got canceled and it was a giant mess. So you saw copies of this on eBay, all of a sudden going for like $200 because everybody was just trying to get one. They didn't think they'd be anymore. So like I said, I had to wait for months to get one of these, and I'm a gigantic Billy Wilder geek. All that being said, as great as this is, as great as the new transfer and everything is, it does have the original mono, but it's if you read the bad audio on Blu-ray site column, which is actually done by a guy I know from some other forums, he does some really in-depth research and comparison of audio tracks. He's actually found that the audio mono on this is still kind of scrubbed, and so the older DVD and presumably the Laserdisc, which I finally picked up, is actually going to give you a better mono presentation because there's literally more information there. So that's a really great release, except for the fact that the audio is not quite as good as older releases. So that's one where it's just what they were provided by the studio in terms of the master. They made a new 4K master, but apparently they used whatever MGM gave them for the audio, and so the audio is not what it should be, and it just kills me. I'm like, man, it's so close. There's even a number of Criterions like that, Criterion Blu-rays with great picture and audio that's not so great, or so again, the detective work never ends. Let's see. Sergio Leone had a 4-hour version of Once Upon a Time in the West never released. I only heard James Woods was able to view it while filming Once Upon a Time in America back in '84. I hadn't heard that story. Of course, with Leone, the number of edits and versions and such never ends, and we find out more stuff all the time. Things that were not supposed to have been shot or non-existed or not ever released, and honestly, it's gotten to a point where myself and others have found out so much that I am not surprised by any difference or edit or anything that could pop up with the Leone title, and the fact that studios still can't get stuff right, and pretty much no Leone film has a proper video release. They all have problems. Case in point, I've been talking about the new Kino release of For a Few Dollars More from a new 4K scan of the negative done by the same Italian studio behind the god-awful 4K scans, 4K masters of Good, Bad, Ugly and Fistful of Dollars with the awful revisionist color grading and all that crap. But Kino, supervised this one, and the new disc, it looks good. I don't know if the color is 100% perfect, but it doesn't have the snippets of additional footage that was restored finally to the German disc that's been missing on and off for decades. And so it's now technically it's still incomplete, and it still has sync issues for the English mono, and that's been around since the first MGM DVD. And so no release can be perfect. And some people are like, well, you just can't be pleased. And it's like, well, no, we're all saying the same thing. I remember I first wrote to MGM about a Leone film. It was about the English extended version of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It was 2003. It was right before I went into high school, and I actually wrote them a letter asking about their process, because I'm like, well, this doesn't seem right. You're reconstructing to the Rome premiere preview edit that Leone later trimmed for the general Italian release version. So technically you're putting things back in that Leone himself took out because he wanted to take them out. And then the whole 5.1 god-awful remix with the brand new sound effects and the actors coming back all these years later re-recording their dialogue, and they just totally ripped apart the sound mix and stuff. And I remember getting back one of those PR brush-off letters, basically, it was like, thank you for contacting us. If you have a problem with one of your discs, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, I didn't write to the video department. And, I was 13 at the time, and here I am still, talking about Leone films and edits and stuff. I have heard, of longer Once Upon a Time in the West edits and stuff. The Italian release version is a little bit different. Of course, there were scenes that were trimmed out and are, apparently lost. Like, for example, when harmonica is beaten, and I think he's beaten in the laundry washing house or whatever. And you know, there's some additional footage of Keenan Wynn as the sheriff, which, you know, if you look at the film, you wonder, well, how does Harmonica suddenly have, you know, the bruise on his face? Well, that's because they cut out the scene of him getting beaten up. And, you know, why is Keenan Wynn, you know, such a great famous actor? Why does he have such good billing if he's only in one scene? Well, he was originally in another scene. But that being said, I don't think there's any problems with the 165-minute version. I think it runs perfectly. The only problem with that is the 165-minute version is kind of messed up because the end credits use the wrong music cue. They switched to Cheyenne's theme, and that's been there since they made the reconstructed long version. And it's supposed to end with Jill's theme, the soaring aria that, you know, starts the end credits. It's not supposed to suddenly change into Cheyenne's theme. And then the other thing, Leone always debated on whether or not he should show Harmonica getting up after the opening train station sequence. So most of the prints in Italy and Europe don't have that scene, and apparently it was Paramount in the U.S. who was funding the film demanded that he put it in there because otherwise the movie didn't make any sense. You know, if you see him go down at the very, very beginning and then he just shows up again, it's like, no, it doesn't make sense. It's rumored that it was actually the head of Paramount, Charlie Bluthorn himself, who said that had to go back in. So that's one scene that, you know, it's debated among Leone scholars if that should be included in the release edit or not. The current Paramount Blu-ray is really great. It's a big step up over the DVD. The only problem is that the mono is lossy, and it's still the same mono track from the Letterbox Laserdisc that has some noise in it. They've never cleaned it up. So the Laserdisc is still better for audio because it's mono and PCM. And it does have a 5.1 remix on the Blu-ray that, you know, it's not as good as the mono, but at least it doesn't have a whole bunch of replaced sound effects like The Good, Bad, and the Ugly. But yeah, I mean, I'd love someday for like a long lost, like rough cut, you know, Leone version to show up. But, you know, the snippets and turn up all the time, or like lobby cards and stills of, you know, scenes that were supposedly never shot. Like what's turned up of, there's a moment in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly when towards the very end, when Tuco is trying to get to Sand Hill Cemetery, and you know, when Blondie's with the dying soldier and finally gets his poncho, when he shoots the cannon at Tuco and knocks him off the horse and everything, and basically like blows him into the cemetery. There was a scene where Tuco tries to take another cannon and light it and fire it back at Blondie, and this is turned up because there's actually some stills that show Eli Wallach, you know, doing everything, you know, and waiting for the explosion to go off. And then it shows that the cannon that he lit actually just explodes. So it was a great gag and very fitting with Tuco's character. But that's just another thing that's turned up, just like differing edits of the torture sequence of Tuco in the Union prison camp. So it just, you can never stop researching Leone films, and there's never a video release that's perfect. And unfortunately, that's still the truth to this day. I know on the Laserdisc group, somebody was, or it may have been 4K80 or something. One of the Facebook groups, somebody's talking about they had the new Kino for a few dollars more, and they were simply wondering what was the best version on Blu-ray for each of the Leone films. And then I wrote like a Cliff Notes version, and my little bubble on my phone suddenly got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it just got like ridiculously long. And I was like cutting it to a bare minimum. I'm like, yeah, this isn't easy to explain, is it? But yeah, that's a hugely important pet topic of mine, has been since I was a teenager, and it's still not right, unfortunately. Let's see, Melinda says, is there any genre of film that you won't collect or don't like? I'm not a fan of slasher films from the 80s. That's pretty much it for me. Modern horror that everybody likes. Modern horror, I'm not into exploitation films, gore fest, any stuff like that. Like, it's cool that people like that, but it's just not for me. I got into classic horror as a kid. I thought all horror films were like modern horror films, just like I thought all Westerns were the same. And I had to basically discover it on my own. So I'm a big classic horror geek. I don't really do modern horror at all. But again, you know, that's like a big part of collecting these days, it seems. Genre films, exploitation films, cult films, and especially like slasher films, and like the lower budget, trashier horror films and stuff. And more power to people if that's what you like. It's a great thing to collect, but it's just not really for me. I would have said musicals with that, because I don't like musicals. But if you've seen any of my videos, I started buying musicals on Laserdisc that, I'm like, well, this is cheap and it's hard to find. And the Blu-ray of this has a remix and doesn't have the original audio. And this is supposed to be a Technicolor restoration. And oh God, I bought another musical. I have to watch this at some point. And I hate musicals, but, with some films, even if I don't think I'm going to like them, if it's an older catalog title, I at least think to myself, I'm like, okay, I can rationalize this as being, like, okay, I'm going to study something new and hopefully learn something about the medium, or the history of the studio at that time, or the the actor actress performance of the director or the writer or cinematographer or whatever. So I pretty much will try most anything. It's just modern horror. It's just not for me. I don't like ostensibly being scared, and I don't like cheap exploitation stuff, because it just like I'm like, it's just not for me. Of course, it's different when you're like with a bunch of people and you're kind of laughing along with stuff. But it's just not really for me. 4K says, I'm a huge Godzilla fan, and one of the films I'm happy to own is Godzilla 1985 VHS from New World. The Raymond Burr version will never be seen in high def. I have the Japanese cut on Blu-ray. That's something I've been meaning to dig into more. I've only really seen the original Godzilla film, and then some of the remakes. And there's just so many and so many different versions, and so many films that are totally different in the original Japanese or Asian versions, that I just want to do my research first and make sure that I'm watching the right version. I'm the same way about all the Hong Kong action classics. I've seen a great number of them and I love them dearly, but I try and find like the best original version I can get my hands on, even if it's like some crappy terrible source that some fan had to rescue, because I'm like, I really want to see this, but I don't want to watch a chopped up, redubbed, crappy version. But Gojira, the original Japanese Godzilla, it's fantastic. It's really dark, and I saw the like you said, the Raymond Burr version as a kid, and I'm like, well, I mean, it looks really interesting, black and white, I thought when I was a kid, but you see the original Japanese, and the tone is totally different, because, it's really not about a giant monster. It's basically about the specter of atomic fallout and the inherent fear of the entire country over what happened at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I mean, it's really dark. And I know that's why Criterion put it out. I'm really glad they did. But yeah, of course, now the American, I guess, for lack of a better term, Burrized version, or Burr ground version, is going to become lost to time, and I think that should be preserved as well, because it was very important, and it is totally different, and people grew up with that, and it is part of the film's history. But yeah, I know that so many Godzilla films exist in multitudes of versions, and it looks like a lot of these are starting to be presented again somewhat, it seems. So I'm like, well, that's at least good, but I've got to dig into those. Like I said, I've only really seen Gojira, and I saw the 98 Godzilla as a kid, and I haven't seen it since. I'll have to check that out. And I've seen part of the new Godzilla remake, but I really didn't care for it. It seemed like super modern and kind of, I have to admit, it seemed kind of boring to me. Yeah, better than the Burr version, in my opinion. Glad to own both. Yeah. Like I said, I hate it when things get, finally restored, and then they just throw away what was there for decades and just act like it never happened. And then that becomes the rare version. Elvin says, I didn't see Solo Wars based on the promo trailer and the way the actors say their lines. Their mannerisms don't really have character. Is it worth watching Disney's Star Wars Rogue One? Um, you're saying is Solo worth watching, and that you liked Rogue One because it was kind of like a standalone. Um, well, that's kind of a touchy subject for me because um, I'm kind of different in my Star Wars fandom than most because I kind of have my feet in different places. Like I said, I've been on original trilogy for years. Ironically, I started with the '97 special edition and the theatrical re-release, and then I got really big into the EU, and I still read and reread a lot of the novels and short stories and things. And I think that's the big lost part of Star Wars that most people have never gotten into because the EU was really, really great. And Disney has refused to use any of it except for pretending like it never happened, branding it as legend, saying it's not canon, even though their canon makes absolutely no frickin' sense. And then they've actually literally pulled some ideas from the EU and then turned them into super generic plot points that don't make any sense. And Disney has no idea what they're doing with this. They thought it was going to be like a Marvel thing all over again, and they've really shot themselves not only in the foot but both feet, both knees, all the legs, everything. And of course, they canceled all the standalone films. You know, the Boba Fett film, the Obi-Wan film. And they're just waiting for Episode 9 to come out. You know, a second. Sorry, I get these little things in the back of my throat. Sometimes I get stuck. But I have to say, you know, I did see Solo, and yeah, it really didn't have much. I mean, if you've seen Rogue One, just imagine, you know, it not being so oppressively dark. But I was quite surprised by Solo. I thought it was going to be terrible, you know, because Ron Howard took it over like halfway through or like before even halfway through. But for me, of the films Disney's put out, it was probably the least offensive. But then again, it wasn't really trying to do much of anything. You know, it's just like, hey, we got a standalone film and it's young Han. And I'm like, well, we've had Han stories pre Star Wars. You know, there are several really great ones. Um, and it just really wasn't anything special, and that was really depressing, just like all the other Disney ones. But at least it wasn't, you know, like one that instilled like intense rage and frustration in me. And then there's The Last Jedi, which we shouldn't ever bring up because good God, I don't know what they were smoking on that one. That has nothing to do with anything. um you know, that being said, give Solo a watch, see what you think. It's pretty obvious. Like, you know what you're going in for. You know what you're paying your ticket for, buying your ticket for, and that's pretty much what you get. It's not anything special, but it is better than what the trailers would suggest because most trailers are cut in a way to make it look like super flashy for the little 90 seconds on YouTube. And just like Rogue One, there's stuff in the trailer that's not actually in the film. And to be honest, I know a lot of people are saying they loved Rogue One, but I really didn't. I felt the tone was not Star Wars-ish at all. It was so oppressively dark, and the Rebel Alliance was suddenly like, backstabbing covert ops at the CIA. And I'm like, why is this feeling like one of the Bourne sequels all of a sudden instead of Star Wars? And then you look and you see that, they had script doctoring and script revisions by, Tony Gilroy, who did the Bourne sequels. And I'm like, well, this isn't Star Wars. Like, Star Wars can be dark. Star Wars was dark, but it has an inherent tone. When you get away from that, you lose stuff. So that's why for me, still the EU is the heart of Star Wars, and the really great EU novels. It's like the purest form of Star Wars possible. I still think Brian Daley's Han Solo trilogy, which was written in between Star Wars and Empire in 1978 and 79. It's 3 books. But even more specific, the first one, Han Solo at Star's End, that's probably the best Star Wars novel I've ever read. It has none of the other characters that it has completely new stuff, but that is a pure science fiction adventure novel. And I don't think anybody understood Star Wars better than Brian Daley did. He also wrote all of the He wrote the entire NPR radio drama. If you've never heard the radio drama, oh my God, it's like taking the spirit of the films into the stratosphere, because all of a sudden they get to run for 5, 6, 7 hours, and have all the additional materials that were supposed to be in the film, and then he wrote additional materials and character pieces and stuff. So it's an even more rich tapestry than even the original film. So I cannot recommend the radio dramas highly enough, and I'm a huge Brian Daley fan. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people like Force Awakens, and that's good for them. But I don't care for anything Disney has done with their own Disney Wars, is what I call it. But yeah, for me, it's still in the EU, and the EU is still the heart of Star Wars. And yes, there are some goofy, dumb, bad EU books and things, but at least everything made sense. And there was a committee to make sure that everything actually fit and made sense. And ultimately, they'd go to George Lucas, who would say, "Oh, well, that's fine," or "No, you can't do that. That's a little much." That he was like the final arbiter, and he was supposed to be the arbiter for Disney, but apparently it was suggested in the contract instead of stipulated. So when he signed everything over, then he kind of found himself going, oh, okay, so they did that. Oh, well, okay, yeah, I guess it's their baby now. Right. So, um, yeah, it's just yeah, I really, I'm at the point where I just don't want to know. I don't want to know. For me, Episode 7 was and will always be Heir to the Empire. And if you compare Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire to anything Disney's done, it's like comparing a 5-year-old playing with their Star Wars toys to a Shakespeare play. I mean, it's that different, because the Disney stuff has no context, I think, with the Star Wars universe in any way. There's no context whatsoever. It's just like they just started throwing stuff up at the screen because it's stuff you're supposed to recognize. And I know I'm getting off on a tangent here, but I'm trying to give you an idea of where I'm at with it. But yeah, I can't recommend the original expanded universe novels enough, and especially Heir to the Empire is where you should start. That's the one that really got the main swath of novels kicked off, and Heir to the Empire is totally the Episode 7 that should have happened, and it's really, really great because it has context. So anyway, that's my Star Wars in a nutshell. 4K says, do the earlier DVD Snapcase releases use the same masters as the Laserdisc? Most early DVDs do. Of course, they started doing remastering and stuff, so sometimes they'll be a little clearer, but for the most part, unless you know for sure that something had a remastering or a new master struck, or it says so on the back, or if you compare them and they're different, 9 times out of 10, early first DVDs, especially snapper cases, anytime a DVD came out from like anywhere between 96 to like 2000, and if it was like the first DVD release of something, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a port of the Laserdisc master. Because I think studios were like, well, we paid all this for a master, and it's THX certified, and it's got 5.1, and now we can just slap it on a single layer disc, because the masters were technically smaller, and they could literally put them on the early DVDs that were only single layered. And then when they got to dual layering and special editions and the market had taken off, things got a bit better. Like for example, I've got the John Ford, John Wayne box up here, and it has the special edition of The Searchers. The first DVD of The Searchers was a snap case, and it was a port of the last Laserdisc, which I think was like from '97. And then that was on DVD up until this came out in 2006, and it was a brand new HD master that, some people had some qualms about the color, and some people didn't really like the old one. And then there's been a revisit in HD for Blu-ray, and more people have qualms about that color timing. And so it's still an ongoing debate. But just for example, that's the way it went. Stagecoach is the same way. It came out on an early Laserdisc. Then Warner put it out with digital sound, and then they put it on DVD in a snapper case early on, and that was a port of the Laserdisc. And then for this box set, they also made a newer version of Stagecoach and put it out on a little, this is a 2-disc set with some special features. So yeah, that's pretty much how it went. So most DVDs made between like the first couple years up till like 2000, 2001, I think DVD really started to take off around the time of The Matrix coming out in 99, 2000. But still, you have titles that came out on DVD in 2005 that are Laserdisc ports. Like I was pretty interested to find that when I finally got the Val Lewton DVDs and I finally saw some of the Tarzan sequels on DVD, they were identical to their Laserdisc counterparts. I guess because they didn't want to pay to restore them, or they didn't have any better available versions and stuff. The Thin Mans are another. All the Thin Man films are based on the transfers made for the old Laserdisc box. So since the DVDs for those are out of print and they're expensive, you actually pick up the Laserdisc box, get better audio, and you can get the Laserdisc box for like 10 or 15 bucks, whereas the DVDs go for like 50 or more because they're out of print. But yeah, it kind of depends. But, you know, for the first couple of years, if a title had already been out on Laserdisc, particularly a later remastered widescreen or THX certified one, it's pretty much going to be a port of the Laserdisc master. And it'll either be better because it's now on a DVD and should technically have better quality, or it'll be about the same, or it will most likely be worse because you have all kinds of digital artifacting, noise, and stuff. And that's what a lot of people complained about when DVD was coming in. You know, they're like, oh, we don't like the digital harshness. Laser will always be great because it has analog smoothness and stuff. And then eventually DVD got better to the point where, you know, you really couldn't use that argument anymore. But yeah, long story short, most early DVDs usually are Laserdisc port. Linda says, are you looking forward to anything coming to theaters in the future, such as the Dune remake, which is, I didn't know it had a date set, but yeah, I guess it's supposed to come out in 2020. I mean, I guess it'll be interesting to see what they do with that. I'm not like a giant Dune fan. I've seen the Lynch film once or twice, and I started to read the novel once. I guess I should really go back and get a copy of the book and actually read through it this time, because it is like a giant important work of science fiction, and I do like science fiction, so I guess I have to try it again. I hate to say it, but I'm really not looking forward to anything. I like to just try and go in with an open mind, but usually I just get so depressed with everything. Usually not being what I'm interested in or looking for, or being, you know, super modern or things. And then the fact that most theaters these days are just so bad because quality control is gone. And I've been a theater geek my whole life. I've worked in theaters all over the place and basically every capacity. And I can't even tell you a theater in this state that has, you know, proper projection and good sound that's actually, you know, properly done. You know, I will wait for a DVD or a Blu-ray, and you know, if at all possible, because I know at least at home I can enjoy it more because I don't have to deal with all the other crap. And I know when I saw Mission Impossible Fallout, I tried to figure out, you know, what theater had Dolby Atmos, and I called a bunch of places, and it was like pulling teeth because, you know, I couldn't get a straight answer from anybody because there are no projectionists anymore. There's nobody who actually knows anything that's going on. Everything's run by remote in most chain theaters, and even the more in their attempts at offering premium screens really usually aren't that premium and have their own problems and stuff. And that stuff just drives me bonkers. You know, I can't stand something not being right at home, and I actually know a lot about theaters, so it drives me crazy. So then I finally gave up and saw Fallout somewhere. And sure enough, in the end helicopter chase, you know, the big action climax of the movie, for about 2 minutes in that, the screen froze and threw up some giant green digital artifacting blocks all over the screen, literally froze. The audio kept running and stuttering. And I'm like, this is great. I'm so glad. I spent like a couple hours calling places trying to find who had the best presentation around, and I still have to deal with this crap. So yeah, I just, every time I think about stuff, I'm like, you know, I could see that. I know I probably won't like it that much, so I guess I'm just gonna wait till I can rent it or something, or watch it on disc, because it's so much more enjoyable in the home now. And home gear and home tech has caught up and even surpassed most theaters anyway, because, you know, the fact that you can go out and get a 4K television at Walmart, even though it's not going to have HDR, you can get one of those TCLs for, you know, even under $300. And it's technically hitting 4K resolution, even though it doesn't have HDR. And most, you know, like 80 to 90% of theaters in this country are still 2K. So already you're just going to Walmart and buying a TV off the shelf that has a better resolution than what you're able to get at your local theater. And then the audio reproduction, even with just like standard equipment, can be so much better at home. You know, and all this research I've actually started found, I think starting in the Laserdisc era is when home video really started to outstrip theater reproduction in terms of quality, because with digital sound, Dolby surround encoding, and then AC3 and DTS 5.1 in the home, you could really have nice dynamic audio tracks on any of the three. And that could be a lot better than what your theater had, because most theaters still weren't THX certified. Most were still running optical tracks and with SR, and some not so well. It just totally varied on how good your theater was. So there's a good chance that the Laserdisc could actually sound better than the theatrical experience. So I think that's where that really got started in terms of enjoying a movie more at home, or enjoying it, seeing it at home for the second time on video, more than seeing it in the theater. And so yeah, that just that really makes me sad. But yeah, I kind of adopted a wait and see thing, a wait and see methodology for new stuff. Because usually if I see something and I'm like looking forward to it, I know I'm probably going to be disappointed when I finally get to go see it. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I just wish there was a really good theater. I usually just wind up going to art houses for repertory shows and film screenings and stuff. And of course, they have to deal with whatever they're given and whatever their budget is, and you know, whatever equipment they can set up. So it's not like you can go to an art house and see a really great action film with a really dynamic sound mix. You know, it's not really going to sound its full potential. I actually saw a print of Speed at an art house, and it was absolutely fantastic, absolutely gorgeous. But the problem was that, you know, the art house is primarily playing foreign films and films that are from the mono era. So it really couldn't handle this super boisterous, you know, reference loud audio mix. So it was trying, but you know, they're not even set up for a Dolby AC3 or DTS 5.1 from film. They can do it for DCPs and stuff, but they don't have the gear for 5.1 for their film side. So again, you're just looking at something there where they have to, you know, use what they have. So I think I went over most everything I had set out in terms of what I was going to go over. There are some other things. I do have a couple records that I did pick up. I don't know if you guys are big into record collecting, but I know I said before I'm thinking about also doing some videos of at least just some segments or highlights of my record collection. But since I pulled these aside, I guess I'll just go ahead and show them real quick. So this is one that got announced. I was very surprised. I didn't think it was gonna get a reissue ever, and I think it's quite an underrated record. This is the new 10th anniversary reissue of U2's No Line on the Horizon album, and this is a brand new remaster. This is the clear vinyl version. I don't really go in for special releases and colored vinyl and stuff, but I really like this album. I think it's quite underrated. It's one of their more experimental records, and it's like the only one in the past like 15 years where they tried to do more experimental stuff like they used to in the 90s. And I just got this. I'm really excited to check this out, and I've heard some really good reviews on some of the music forums. And it's supposed to be a brand new remaster, and supposed to be better than the original 2009 vinyl. That was better because the CD has inherent loudness, of course. But I'm really excited to check this out. I'm a big fan of this album. I do think it's very underrated. And so I hope this helps some people go back to it with a fresh look. So I'm really excited to check this out. Let's see. 4K, yeah, 4K collects movie soundtracks on vinyl. That's how I got started record collecting. It was actually trying to collect the Bond soundtracks and a couple other things. And I do have some really nice rare soundtracks, and then I have some that I've just picked up, you know, whatever turns up locally that I can find. But soundtracks, it seems, you know, vinyl can be great, But with the explosion of the CD market and the fact that you can fit more and they go back and do complete scores on CD, I think soundtracks can usually be better on CD because you don't have the inherent limitations of old LP masters and short programs and stuff. And there are some labels doing some fantastic work now. There's so many CDs that I'd love to get, but they cost so much because they're all small labels. They have to pay large licensing fees. I think my favorite releases recently have been La La Land Records did complete scores for David Arnold. David Arnold scores for Die Another Day and The World's Not Enough. And those have long been ones I've wanted to have because the old CDs were, well, The World's Not Enough had a good amount of score, but Die Another Day was a terribly short CD and it was super loud and stuff. So those are really beautiful 2 CD presentations with demos and extras and stuff. And it was just wonderful to have this. But of course, they cost a lot of money. So let's see. 4K also said, I saw Jurassic Park in theaters when first released at a midnight show with DTS. Lucky man. I was blown away and saw Batman Returns as well Dolby Digital. Oh, did you really? Because I've often wondered what that was like. Because Batman Returns was the first Dolby Digital release. If I may ask, where did you see it? Because I had read that it only technically played in the only Dolby equipped theaters. I think there was like one in London and one in Los Angeles. And so like 99% of people saw it in standard Dolby Stereo SR. And I know when I got to see a print of it, it only had an SR track and it sounded great. It's the same mix as the Laserdisc 2.0, but it didn't have 5.1 on the print at all. And it was an original release print from Warner Brothers they had sent over. I saw this about, it was like 3 or 4 years ago. And I was really kind of bummed because I was like, oh man, I can finally see the first 5.1 release. And then I did some research and I'm like, oh, well, it technically was, but most people didn't see it that way. And then of course I know Star Trek VI was like the test film. So like I guess if you saw it at like a sneak preview in LA, you would have seen it with a Dolby Digital track. But again, like everybody saw it in Dolby SR if they saw Star Trek VI. So I guess it just took a little while longer for Dolby to roll out because theaters didn't want to buy the gear and change stuff around, which is, how it always is. But I would have loved to have seen Jurassic Park in DTS. I know some of the fan reproductions and things have actually gone out and tried to scan DTS CD-ROMs and recreate the original DTS mix to really great success, and it sounds absolutely incredible. And of course, all the home versions have been, like tweaked and manipulated slightly, and it's been remixed a couple times. But the Jurassic Park is a groundbreaking achievement in terms of film mixing. I mean, that is a legendary audio mix, just as much as Batman Returns being the first Dolby Digital film. But I still think Batman Returns, I think they pretty much mixed for 2.0 SR, and then it was just like, oh, we can release in 5.1. Okay, well, let's make sure it works, because 99% of people are going to hear it in Dolby Stereo anyway. But on Jurassic Park, they totally designed for 5.1, and then would do the 2.0 down mix and make sure that worked. And then, of course, most people would have seen it in 2.0 anyway, which is why the 2.0 on Laserdisc is important because, that's how most people heard it in theaters first. And that's how most people heard it on video for years until you get 5.1 on disc. Let's see. Couple of Waxwork and Death Waltz releases. I think I've heard of Waxwork. I haven't heard of Death Waltz, so I'll have to look that up. That sounds like a fun name anyway. So you saw Returns in New York. Okay, so I guess it showed in Dolby Digital New York then. Okay, so that would kind of fit with what I read, that it was like pretty much in a few test markets where it actually showed up in Dolby Digital. Do you remember if it had like any like special signs, or was there something on the ticket, or was it like advertised as being Dolby Digital or anything, or is it like too far back to remember? I'm just really curious if it was even like advertised or anything at the time. Elvin says, please do videos on different pressings and different label pressings on Bond soundtracks, originals and reissues, catalog numbers. Oh gosh, I have that has been a long a long-standing research project of mine, and it gets really complicated because you got to track down different. There are different mixes. You got to track down different versions of the title song compilations, and then the singles versus the film mixes, and then some of the songs had completely different recordings, re-recordings as singles, and then some of the scores have never actually been released. Like the score for Doctor No has never been released. It's the soundtrack album has the Bond theme and then some of the Calypso Island music numbers, and so the Monty Norman score is still unreleased. And then the Spy Who Loved Me album is actually a re-recording, so the actual film mix of the Spy score is still unreleased. And La La Land is supposed to be doing some more Bond scores because they've had so much success with the two Arnold scores. And I think what they'll probably do is maybe be working their way backwards. So I'm guessing and hoping they'll do Tomorrow Never Dies next. But yeah, Bond has not been really well respected in terms of the soundtracks, period. And there's a couple threads on some music forums, and but yeah, it's they really need a lot of work. Some of the 2003 CD remasters restored a lot of missing pieces, but that whole process was very rushed. They had a very tight budget, and they only got to do a select number of the original series. And they've even said, there've been interviews with the people who worked on it. They were like, yeah, I remember seeing, The Spy Who Loved Me, and it was 16 track, and we only had this number of gear. And I was just like, man, one day I'd love to be able to do that. And that, of course, was back in 2003. And there have been some remasters recently that were pressed straight to vinyl, but I don't really know why they did that. They're the original LP programs all over again, and they've been subjected to some other remastering and stuff. So I'll definitely do that. I've been cataloging, and I know some other people have been researching as well. But recently, there have been a couple of really nice CD releases that have started to finally correct that. So the easiest recommendation is to pick up the 2003 CD remasters for some of the expanded scores, and then some of the expanded ones that Ryko did in the late 90s also got reissued as part of that, so you can pick those up. So the remastered CDs to pick up would be Thunderball, You Only Live Twice, Under Majesty's Secret Service, Diamonds Are Forever, Live and Let Die. Those are the 5 that got expanded. And then Ryko did For Your Eyes Only, and as an expansion along with the Living Daylights, and you can get those in the 2003 series as well. They just reissued those. And then the original GoldenEye CD is really good. The remaster is not as good, and you can get the original GoldenEye CD for nothing. Tomorrow Never Dies has some different releases, and but again, the new World's Not Enough and Die Another Day complete scores are must-owns. And the last thing I'll say, there's also a new release of the 1967 Casino Royale score, which I know a lot of people don't like the film, and I absolutely love it because I'm a crazy person. But the score is indisputably a masterpiece and is just an audiophile's wet dream. The only trouble is the original master tape got damaged so severely that the original warmth and extremely amazing detail of the original stereo LPs is unavailable. So all the CD and audiophile reissues over the past years have never been able to match the original stereo LP, and that's what makes that a collector's item. And trust me, that's about one of the best sounding records you'll ever hear in your life. It's amazing. But Quartet Records did another reissue, another attempt at it for the, I think it's referred to as like the 50th anniversary release or something, but just came out this past year. And an engineer by the name of Chris Malone, who's very good at doing detailed research, worked on it. And I talked with him a little bit on one of the music forums. That CD is fantastic. It has the complete film score. It has some of the mono mixed tracks and additional cues and things, and some of the really rare single 45 mixes and stuff that have never been reissued. So that is another one that's an easy recommendation, and it'll probably go out of print at some point. So if you're into the Burt Bacharach Casino Royale score for the 67 film, the new Quartet CD is just out of this world, and it sounds really, really close to the stereo LP for the main stereo program, because they found like a copy that was made before the tape got damaged, and so they used that. And it's not as good as if they've been able to scan the tape, but of course the tape is now like a shadow of his former self. So somebody had made a copy like right before that, and so they were able to use that. And so this one sounds better than any of the other versions I've tried. So highly recommended those three, the newest releases. All right, looks like I got some more comments down here. 4K says the ads pointed me to the theater that had Batman Returns and Dolby Digital. Okay, that fantastic to know. I'm really happy. That's like, you know, seeing the old ads for which theater had 70 mil and which theater had DTS or Dolby back in the 90s and stuff. So that helps a lot. I'd never heard of anybody actually seeing it on the original run and knowing that it was Dolby Digital. So that's cool. So I'm just glad it happened. I've never heard anything outside of reading that it only played in like a few cities. I'm sure you don't remember much anything. Oh wait, you do. Okay. Saw Batman Returns at the Lowe's Village Theater 7. The opening to the film, the train starting up, and then the digital logo pop up, and then the Warner logo. Oh, okay, cool. So the Dolby, like I guess they usually call it the Dolby train. So I guess that was the first one. I missed Pete in here. Hey, Pete, how are you? I'll get to your question in a second because I've been on a Batman Returns kick. Anytime Batman Returns gets popped up, I get all excited and I start babbling like crazy. But that's really interesting to know that that they used the train first. I knew that was one of the first ones, but I didn't know it was like the first one. So that's really cool. That's good to know. I'll have to make note of that somewhere. And of course, the Bat films are now, I think they're pretty much confirmed that they are going to be coming out in 4K. I think somebody uploaded the cover artwork that they're going to use, and it looks like really, really crappy. Like, I think the Digital Bits Facebook page said it looked like chewing gum wrappers or something. But yeah, I saw like a quick flash of it. I'm like, I hope that's a mock-up. It looks terrible. But I'm just excited they're actually doing new masters because the first two Burton films really need it. They're supposed to be printed really dark and the video transfers are still too bright. And if you see a print of Returns, it's gorgeous. And the refrigerated sets actually look a lot more realistic because on video, you know, you can clearly tell it's an enclosed set because it's so bright. But I think the 5.1 mixes on the, because it came out first in 5.1 on DVD, I think they probably would have done like a remastered AC3 run of Batman and Batman Returns had Laserdisc lasted a little longer. I think they just jump shipped and moved to DVD because Batman Forever and Batman and Robin were out in AC3 on Laserdisc. And the DVDs of those two were out at the same time. They were snapper cases, and they're ports of those and include a 133 version from the VHS master on the other side. And I think the 5.1 in Batman Returns is pretty much the same on all, and it's probably what you heard. I would love to hear the original 5.1 on a print one day, but I'm sure it's probably the same. And I've compared the 5.1 to the 2.0 about a million times. They're the same mix. It's just like some slight differences in terms of having discrete versus non-discrete. And I'm really excited to see what they do in 4K, as long as they transfer the Burton films and make sure they're properly dark. I'd love to have the 89 original have the bassier original mix that's on the Laserdisc and the that first DVD in 5.1, because I absolutely love that audio. And the later one is fine. It just doesn't have all that low-end nice punchiness. And Batman Forever needs a lot of help. The Blu-ray HD master is really crappy. And Batman Forever is one of those where the 2.0 mix, I swear, is better than the 5.1. It's so much better. The mix is done with a lot more. I mean, even the surrounds seem better encoded. And there's a lot of ADR in that film. And it's not as harsh and obvious on the 2.0 matrix compared to the 5.1. I still love Batman Forever. It gets a lot of flack, but I think there's a lot of good stuff in there. But of course, the studio cut it to pieces right before it came out and resequenced the first half of it. And there's a lot of stuff that was shot and never included. So they really should do a director's cut with Joel Schumacher, which they were supposed to do back for the 2005 DVD. And they unfortunately nixed that at the last minute because apparently they didn't want to spend the money, because who likes comic book movies? And of course now that's gone out the window after the diner cut of Superman 2 and the great resurgence and stuff. So, you know, I hope they would have finally have done it, but since there's not been any press release about a Batman Forever alternate cut. I don't think that's going to happen, which is a real shame because there's a much better movie in there. And if you haven't heard of any of this, there's some internet articles out there talking about the differences. But the easiest thing to do is to go pick up the original paperback novelization, which is really well written. Peter David wrote it, who wrote a lot of Star Trek books, and it also builds on some of the stuff that was in the original script. And if that had been the film that had come out in '95, I think it would probably still be seen as probably the best Batman film, period, because the original script was a lot closer in tone to what Keaton had been doing. It was supposed to be a direct sequel to Batman Returns and supposed to expound on a lot of stuff. And but again, I still try and defend it forever a lot, and I really hope they do work on all the Bat films because they really need it. So Pete asks, have you ever seen David Leitch's Dune? And if so, what do you think? I kind of mentioned that before because Melinda asked about the upcoming Dune remake. I have seen Dune, but it's been a very long time. And I know there's all the different versions, and there was a lot of turmoil in making it and adapting it. And it seemed anything Dino De Laurentiis was doing, could go one of two ways. I mean, I'm still amazed to this day that Flash Gordon actually works. It is great because it is. Dino was one of those characters of the film industry you read so many stories about. I really do need to go and rewatch it, and I'd like to look at some of the other versions. I know Lynch himself has really kind of like divested himself from it and doesn't like the long version. And as I was saying before, I was going to read the book as a kid, or when at least some years back, and I started to, and I just never got around to finishing it. So I really need to go and read the book because it is, one of the like classic works of science fiction. I know everybody loves the AC3 Laserdisc, and I'd love to find that because it's supposed to have like a really thunderous, bassy AC3 track. It's supposed to be really killer, and it's supposed to be better than the prior versions. So I'd love to find that. I may go ahead and just pick up one of the like the standard Universal Blu-ray is supposed to be pretty decent, and I know there's other versions that have different cuts and stuff. I think some of those are. I think you'd have to get like the deluxe DVD and the Blu-ray and like one or two other ones. Like you have to get like 3 or 4 just to get all the different cuts and all the extras and things. So I'll have to get one at some point and just finally actually see it with fresh eyes. And again, I've really got to read the book. So I'm just really excited about that Batman Returns to bit. I didn't expect that to turn up. I've never heard anybody talk about seeing it in Dolby Digital. I've tried to find out stuff about it because I was just so excited. I was like, wow, Batman Returns was the first Dolby Digital film. Wow, I wonder if it's like, Jurassic Park and DTS, if there was like anything special or a special mix or something. So I'm just happy to know that somebody actually saw it. Elvin says, can't wait for a 4K release of The Untouchables. I'm with you on that one because the current Blu-rays are really crappy. It's based on I think they had like a DVD special edition era master, and so the current Blu-ray, it just looks really mushy and it's not very nice looking. I know there's somebody who posted like some comparisons to like a 35 millimeter trailer, and it was just night and day difference. The color's so much better, and I still like the standard Laserdisc. That's all I have. I don't even have the DVD. I have the original Paramount letterbox Laserdisc. It was one of the first couple discs I found. They got it with a couple other ones, and I watched it. It looked nice, and the sound's great because it's the original 2.0 Matrix audio, and the DVD and Blu-ray just has a remix. So I know there's supposed to be like one of those later release remastered widescreen Paramount versions of it, but that's like super hard to find and come by. So I'll have to check that out if I can at some point. I've nearly bought the Blu-ray because it pops up on sale sometimes, but I'm like, I really like my Laserdisc, and the Laserdisc has original artwork. It has the original one sheet and the beautiful Paramount black letterboxing bars, and the Blu-ray just has a Photoshop thing, and I'm like, oh, okay. And I think it does have a couple extras, but those were made for the DVD. But I'll pick up one of those at some point. I've just been waiting in the hope that they actually, remaster it properly because it really could use it. Pete says Scarface needs a 4K remaster too. The Blu-ray has some DNR. I can agree with you on that. That being said, it is one of the better catalog titles from Universal because they're very DNR happy, and let's just use an old master and slap it on a disc, and we'll call it a day and charge them like $15. But I was actually kind of impressed because I picked up Scarface because it was in one of the Best Buy sales, and I got it because it was it comes with it, at least that version came with the 1932 Howard Hawks original Scarface on DVD, and it was cheaper to get the Blu-ray on sale than it was actually buying the 1932 film on DVD by itself. So I figured, okay, why not? I haven't seen the De Palma version in a while, and it's a pretty nice looking steelbook. I'm not big on steelbooks, but again, it was on sale, and I got it because it had the original 2.0 mix as DTS, so that was at least nice to see. Universal does that now every once in a blue moon, which is at least they're like tipping their hat, I guess, to us maybe. But I can agree with you. It's not great, but at least it's a lot better than most Universal Blu-rays, and it's a decent catalog release. It's got I think it's got all the extra features from the various DVDs, and it does have the original audio mix. Doesn't sound as good as the standard letterbox Laserdisc, of course, but at least it's on there, and at least it's not like lossy Dolby Digital. It's in DTS, so at least that's something. I threw us a bone of sorts. Um, It says, off topic, but look up and listen to the prophecy theme of Dune, one of my favorite pieces of film music. I definitely will then. I remember little bits and pieces of the movie, but like I said, I saw it as a kid, so it's been a very long time. I've been wanting to really go back and watch it. I've just kind of been hemming and hawing about, which version I need to pick up because, it's never easy to simply go and buy a copy of a movie to watch, is it? So I'm still trying to find the AC3 Laserdisc, but I think I may just go ahead and get the regular Universal Blu-ray at some point because it's like super cheap and at least the transfer's halfway decent, especially for Universal. If a Universal Blu-ray is halfway decent, that's already half the battle. Because they've put out so many crappy ones and you just get burned so many times. So I like their Blu-ray of The Jerk. It's just terrible. And I know Shout Factory just came out with one, but of course, if one could pay Shout Factory prices for everything, then I'd have better equipment and gear because I could afford it. So I can't afford a $35 Shout Factory upgrade every time I'd like to, unfortunately. 4K says, Predator 4K is fantastic. I have it and it's absolutely stunning compared to the Ultimate Hunters Edition, which is the worst Blu-ray ever of all time. So I had forgotten that. I hadn't realized that the original Predator came out in 4K. I thought it was just the new one. That's good news because even because they had the first Blu-ray with the awful DNR, and then they tried to fix it, and it wasn't really fixed. So that's why I never got it on Blu-ray, because as far as I understood it, both Blu-rays were really kind of crappy. And I had it at DVD on one point, but I think I loaned it to somebody, and I've never gotten the Laserdisc because it's one of those that usually gets snapped up pretty quick because everybody's like, "God, do the job!" Flip through the bins and like, "Oh, Predator." It's like trying to get all the Back to the Futures or all three indies, or they're just some titles. They're not rare; they're just standard letterbox copies. But you're not going to be able to find a affordable copy of Big Trouble in Little China on Laserdisc simply because it's Big Trouble in Little China, and everybody's like, "Oh, I got to have it." But yeah, that's good to know. But of course, that's under Fox, and there's no telling what's going to happen to their video department now that this merger has gone through. And so, as much as it kills me that the lot's being closed down and everything, I can at least, rationalize that as well. It's not exactly the classic original studio. It's a modern studio. But I'm just really worried about what's happening to the video department and what's going to happen to stuff that Fox was restoring. Are the Planet of the Apes 4K restorations actually going to come out? Because Disney likes to restore things and then not ever release that restoration, because that makes sense, right? They restored 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. They spent tons of money and got really great engineers to recreate the original and restore the original 4-track stereo magnetic audio mix. And they premiered it to great acclaim, and Kirk Douglas was there, and it was great. And I read all about it. I'm like, oh, fantastic! And that was like in 2012 or 2010 even or something. And it's just never shown up. And I'm like, oh no. And Fox was doing really well about getting stuff out. and they were, one of the ones leading the charge into catalog titles on 4K. So let's hope, they still continue as some sort of entity or version of their former selves now that they are under the mouse ears domain. Pete says, let's just hope more movies are given to boutique companies. Maybe that way restoration can actually be restoration, not revisionism, that's supposedly restoration. Yes, that is good that the floodgates have opened. I was talking about this a little bit before with, Arrow, I think, is the one that really started leading the charge in just licensing titles and doing their own 4K restorations. But the problem is, not every boutique label is created equal, and a lot of times they're just given things by the studio, and sometimes that can have problems. Like I was talking about on the Bad Audio on Blu-ray site, the guy who does that is the guy I know from another forum, and he was talking about the Arrow release of The Apartment, which is up here. Really beautiful release, super limited. Took me a couple months to get it, and it's great in every way. Fixes the old master with a brand new 4K scan. Looks great, but the mono track is a bit over scrubbed, so it's not as good as even the old MGM DVD mono. So it's just sometimes it depends, because even with the best intentions, like there are even Criterion discs with audio tracks that aren't great and aren't even as good as old Criterion DVDs or Laserdiscs. So there's good and bad. And I was talking before about how this past week I've been talking with a lot of people online about the new Kino release of For a Few Dollars More, and I'm still waiting on mine to get here. But of course, like with any Leone film, there's always going to be issues, and this Kino disc does have issues. Thankfully, it doesn't have the insane, god-awful color revisionism crap that's on the Kino discs of Fistful of Dollars and The Good, Bad, and the Ugly. But of course, that came from the Italian restoration. This new For a Few Dollars More also comes from Italian restoration, but Kino is said to have supervised it. And, so far the screen caps show that the color isn't messed with in that way, which is good. But I don't know if the color is exactly perfect. The black levels aren't exactly perfect. It's a bit soft. It doesn't have the edge enhancement and haloing of the old MGM master, but it's also missing the snippets that were finally restored to the German version, so it's an incomplete version of the film, and the mono sync of the English track is still off, which has been that way and messed up since MGM was making their DVD. So the English mono has been off sync for a few dollars more since like 1998, and no one's ever fixed it properly. It's fixed for the 5.1 remix, which is crap, because no Leone film should ever be listened to in a remix. So you can hear the proper sync on the remix, but even this new Kino has its own problems. So it's going to be a matter of people doing research and stuff. But in a way, it's kind of like the floodgates getting opened up for Laserdisc, like how Criterion got to license a bunch of titles that then they got closed off to later on. That's why Criterion got to put out Casablanca and North by Northwest for examples. But they would get out there and put out a really great source. And you can do the same thing nowadays with a lot of these boutique labels, but it's just a matter of what they're given, what they have access to, what their budget is, and what they can allot in terms of time, resources, and everything. So there's going to be some where it's a really great title put out by a boutique label, and thank goodness it's getting out on Blu-ray, but unfortunately it's not what it could be. Like, for example, Olive has put out Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and Olive is a smaller label, and they work really hard to do as best they can. A lot of times they're working with studio masters. And then they started their signature line, where they did new special editions and also did new special editions of titles they'd already released. Invasion of the Body Snatchers was one. So they pretty much, reused the same studio HD master, which is good, and the best the film's looked on video so far. And they went out and made new features and brought in all the special features that had not been released, because they had made some for a DVD special edition that was supposed to come out and never did. So there's some really great stuff on there. But unfortunately, it's not a brand new 4K scan. It's not, nobody's ever found non-super scope elements of it. So you can never see it without the stretching ratio effect it's been stuck with ever since. And apparently Paramount found and restored the original Perspecta audio mix for it. And it's not on the Olive Blu-ray because nobody knows. So that's one where They tried their hardest, and it's really, really great. Highly recommended. Best the film's ever had on video so far. Really great exclusive extras, but you know, it's so close. It could be better. It could be perfect, but you know, Olive is, you know, doing the best they can. So it's kind of like going to be a crapshoot, I think, for a while. I think a lot of things are going to open up to these boutique labels, which is great. And Kino's going to put out the first boutique UHD with Hannibal. I think it's this year that is coming out. So that's going to start a new frontier for them. And I'm sure Criterion will follow at some point with their first UHD title. So at least it's growing and it's a stable market. I just wished everything cost less, because you just can't afford some of these, and you can't afford to keep up half the time. So you have to wait for sales, and then by the time sales come around, all of these limited runs are sold out, and then you're just kicking yourself like, why did I pick this one over this one, and what am I going to do? So yeah, I mean, I'm excited about where everything's going, but I'm also a bit trepidatious because they're never going to have the resources of a studio label behind them. And some are better than others in terms of even tech specs, because there are some of these labels that aren't, shall we say, as good at encoding or compression and stuff. Like, you know, if you go from an MGM disc to a shout disc, sometimes with the same master, like I said this at the beginning, like you look at their Mad Max, the MGM is better because it has better compression and it's technically better. So the shout has nice extras, but your video quality takes a hit a bit and your audio quality takes a hit a bit. And I can't tell you the number of Kino discs that I've gotten or wanted to get that I see a foreign release or another company releases it later on, same exact master and everything, but the bit rate is like doubled, you know, and I'm like, why Kino, why? But anyway, so like I said before, I'm hopeful, excited, and trepidatious all at the same time. All right, let's see. 4K says, I guess it's still talking about Predator 4K. It has a very cinematic look, and the grain is nicely intact, and the HDR is great, especially the greens in the jungle. No waxy images. Thank goodness. The 4K Predator is the best version out there. I'm sure it is. I'm glad it's out there. I think I've seen some talk now that I think about it on the Blu-ray forum, so I'll have to look through there. That's usually where I like to peruse for, you know, general information, and you know, I can sift through and find some transfer discussion here and there. And there are a couple guys on there that get really, really technical. So if you're ever wondering about where to go to really get to the nitty-gritty of stuff, it's usually the Blu-ray.com forums, but you kind of have to sift through a lot of stuff, and then there's sometimes some, you know, silly arguments going on and stuff like that. But it's usually pretty good, but you have to sift through a lot of stuff. So Melinda says, how can we connect with you on Facebook? Can you friend me there? Yeah, absolutely. I'm on the Laserdisc Forever group. I'll look you up and send you one. I've just got my regular Facebook, so anybody sees me on there, you can just shoot me a request or send me a message or whatever. I'm open to anything. I don't think I'm like privately locked on there or anything. But yeah, I'll send you something. Absolutely. Elvin says, is Criterion going to release any 4Ks? That's what I was saying before. They haven't said anything, but you know, they're already researching this stuff, because they were pretty good about you know, knowing about the Blu-ray field before they ever jumped in, and they were pretty good about doing it pretty quickly. And then they had they kept their DVD line going, and then they switched to doing dual format. And now they have gone away from that. They do primarily Blu-ray, and then they also have, you know, the DVD version available if that's what you desire or what stores want to stock. So I know it's coming. They haven't announced it or anything, and they're doing so many things from 4K transfers and 4K masters. It's just going to be a matter of, you know, paying the expense of making UHDs versus Blu-rays. And like I said, Kino is tiptoeing in it with Hannibal, so I'm sure Criterion's going to follow. But Criterion usually seems to like to make sure they test everything out and figure out exactly how they want to do it first for their market share and everything, which is good and what I think everybody should do. So I also think they'll probably wait for a big title to be their first 4K. I would hope to be The Third Man. I would hope Criterion that would actually get the rights back to The Third Man, because their Blu-ray went out of print and is now scattered, just in the stratosphere of cost. You know, you spend $350 for the Criterion Blu-ray of The Third Man, and it did get a 4K restoration. It's come out in the UK on Blu-ray, which actually I have over here. Which you can actually get for very cheap, and it's region free. It's this one right here, the Vintage Classics Studio Canal release of The Third Man. Beautiful quality. Unfortunately, the audio mix is kind of a mess. It is mono, but there's a lot of issues with it. And if you go over to the Bad Audio on Blu-ray site, you can see some of those. This is currently the best Blu-ray of the film available, and it's the only one of the new restoration. And there's no release of this here in the States. So I'm like, fingers crossed, you know, that's going to be the that would be the Criterion 4K debut title. If not The Third Man, it would hopefully be like another big one that's available in 4K, because you can actually see The Third Man in an art house on like a 4K DCP. I've seen prints of it. I've seen the 4K restoration on DCP, and it looks absolutely gorgeous in 4K. So that's what I would hope. But it's coming at some point. There's no doubt about it, because you know 4K is here to stay, no matter what. All the you know, people want to talk about streaming and stuff, but you know, Criterion does very well with the you know, with Blu-ray, and there's a lot of things that aren't available in 4K yet and need restoration. But I'm sure Criterion will come along soon with UHD. I think they started Blu-ray in like 2008 or 2009, and really got kickstarted in like 2010 doing Blu-rays full time. So it took them a couple of years after Blu-ray really kind of won the format war and got going. So they usually are a little bit more cautious, I think, about getting into a new format. Pete says, old movies seem to have so much better music. I often feel most new soundtracks feel very soulless. I could literally have that written on the wall somewhere, or like engraved in stone. I'm absolutely with you on that, in terms of, you know, film scoring used to be, you know, viewed as a very important thing. You had really talented actual composers doing scores, in addition to, you know, the great legends, and, you know, really experienced people, even people who weren't like big names, where you could make really fantastic scores. And, you know, they'd really sit down trying to build a score to fit the film, and not just be a great score in and of itself. And then, of course, you used to have large orchestras and great recording studios and techniques. And then, of course, recording to tape back in the day with proper orchestration and proper studios. And then most of the really great old film scoring studios are either no longer with us or have been bulldozed and things. And there's some really great studies of the old CTS studios, for example, in England, where John Barry recorded a great number of his classic scores, including the Bond scores, and you know, that detail the work that went into recording these. Or I know Chris Malone, the guy I mentioned before, he's written some articles. He wrote that one, and he wrote some really great articles about the recording of the Star Wars and Indy scores, and the process that John Williams went through with the London Symphony Orchestra and stuff, and how they got it to tape and everything back in the day. So it was really an art form. And I agree with you that most scores today do feel quite soulless. It's like they're there to be there because they're expected, and they carry the film a lot more than they're supposed to, because the score should complement and should enhance things. It shouldn't literally be the train that's carrying the film, or, you know, it shouldn't be driving the truck. That should be the story. And a lot of times that doesn't happen. Or, you know, a score is more a series of tonal noises or atmospheric tracks, which is fine if that's what you're going for, but you know, you can't do that for everything. And I will gladly admit I'm not a Hans Zimmer fan, and that type of scoring to me is just like it just drives me crazy. It's just so boring and endless. And I even love scores to films that I don't like. I love scores to films I've never seen. I've picked up soundtracks before, simply because it's, you know, by one of my favorite composers, or they will have scored a film that's maybe not so good, but the score is great. And then there are, you know, the really great scores that stick with you, that are, you know, either totally symphonic and huge and orchestral works of genius, or they're small and completely off the wall and out there, or jazzy, and, you know, it just runs the gamut. But yeah, I think film scoring has tapered off to such a point that, you know, People always ask me, and we talked about it a little bit here about, what actor would I choose? Who would I suggest for, Bond the next time around? Well, I also like to think about, who in the directing field should take a whack at it. What writer should really work. And one of the hardest ones I have is what composer should do Bond next, because there's hardly anybody left, I think, that can really do a great action adventure score. And as much as I've really hated the modern era of Bond releases, I think consistently the worst overall have been the scores for all of them, because it's just like every time I think they can't possibly get any worse in terms of having a boring, dull score, they manage to top themselves, and it just kills me because the John Barry scores are so well renowned, but almost all the scores of the original series are really fantastic and really elevate the films to something else and work with the films and complement them. And have their own vibes and everything. I even like Eric Serra's Goldeneye score. That still gets a lot of flack, but I think it really works in a lot of ways, and it suits the film and the Euro thriller vibe of it very well. And I'd argue Goldeneye is still a great score, and is a much better score than almost every score I hear today. So I'm with you on that 100%. Scream Factory wanted to do Dracula in 1979, but Universal said only if it was the saturated version. I did not know that. I'm actually surprised. I know that was a director thing. I think he originally wanted to shoot in black and white, and they wouldn't let him, and so he compromised and shot in color. And I guess they just ran all the prints at full saturation, and then when they made the Video Master during the Laserdisc era, he went in and desaturated it and sort of made a compromised version. And I can get that. I can understand it. I just think both versions should be available. I definitely think with Dracula you can play around with color, because Dracula starts in one way, and as he grows due to the piling up of victims, you could play around with it, messing around with the color levels and saturation. Plus, you're going from the brooding, dark, old ruined castle in Transylvania, you're going to London, and it's a totally different area, and it's brighter because it's in the modern world. So I can understand that. I just think both versions should be available. If I remember it correctly, the Universal HD Master isn't super great and has some DNR going on and stuff, but I don't think that film's ever looked as good on home video as it should. I don't actually own any copies. I've seen the DVD. I've seen some screen caps of the Blu-ray and stuff, and I'm like, I've never been a big fan of it, but I appreciate some of the things it was trying to do, and I just think both versions should be available. I think it'd be very easy to do a new 4K scan and present it both ways. But yeah, I think that's just one of those where they're like, oh well, the director supervised this and he wanted it this way back in the day, and I don't even know if they went to him or asked him or anything. Or it may be a contractual thing. I don't know, but nobody's really gone into that outside fan. So that would be one that it would be a good release for a label if they could present both versions with a nice new master. Alan says Bergman huge box set release, which is about 50 films from Criterion. The Blu-ray is very expensive. Yeah, it looks gorgeous. I'd love to have it. My only thing is, as gorgeous as it is, I don't know why Criterion has gone with the disc hub thing, because I really hate when studios use the disc hubs or the little cardboard slot things. And Blu-rays are a lot more scratch resistant, but there have been several like really notorious box sets for being, disc killers. And like the first version of the Planet of the Apes box had those foam hub things, and the disc got messed up. And I finally got the Ford at Fox box set on DVD, and it uses those hubs inside of a book thing, and it was very hard to get a box of those with any of the DVDs not having problems. And then of course the Ten Commandments box, literally it's gorgeous with the fake stone tablets, and I finally bit the bullet and tried one because a lot of places were clearancing them out because they made a revised one. And it took me forever to pry the Blu-rays out. The DVDs were shot. They were just destroyed by the packaging, but at least I was able to get the Blu-rays out. But I had to sit there. It took me like at least a half hour just to get the discs out, and now I keep discs like that with bad packaging in a separate binder. But if you look at the Criterion Bergman release, I haven't heard any complaints, but it's like in those hub style things. And I'm like, I'd rather just have regular cases, you know? And I've been picking up some of the other Bergman Criterion titles anyway. So I hope they'll release all the others so people who have been buying all the Bergman ones to date can still get the new ones and not have to just, you know, buy the box set and get stuff they already have. But yeah, it does look gorgeous. And I know it's got a bunch of new 4K restorations on a bunch of Bergman titles. And there's still so many Bergman films I haven't seen because there's, you know, some have not really been that well available for a long time. And as with anything, it's usually the more well-known, well-renowned ones that are reissued a lot that you're able to see before you really get to the nitty-gritty of somebody's career. But yeah, I agree, it's beautiful, and I'd love to be able to afford it. Pete says, favorite 4K transfer, mine's 2001. Well, I have to admit, it's kind of hard for me because I can only judge by what I've seen in terms of 4K DCPs and you know, clips I see online and stuff, and like some of the 4K streaming things I've seen, because I still don't have a I'm still not 4K set up yet because I've really wanted to get an OLED, but you know, the cost is so high and they're still not perfect. I think I said in the last live stream, I think I'm just going to bite the bullet and go for one of the TCL or Vizio like mid-grade sets that actually have proper HDR, but you know, those are still like $600-700. I do think the new 2001 is a massive improvement over the old outdated master. All the Warner Kubrick titles really need to work. They were all based around they were all done during the DVD, HD, DVD, Blu-ray era during the format war. They were all really outdated, and some had really bad color, and they have tons of issues, and they all have audio remixes and stuff. So 2001 is the first one that's hit 4K, and I'm really excited that it does have the original 1968 audio mix finally, which has been missing since Warner took the film over. And that was a big reason why I always told people they had to get the Laserdisc, because Laserdisc had the original audio mix. I think the color is very, very good. I know people said that there has been an issue that one of the fades was incorrectly timed, so they had to. I think it was either it was a fade that was supposed to be a hard cut, or no, I think it's a hard cut that was supposed to be a fade. And Warner has now started doing reissue copies. So I've been trying to figure out which copy that you have to get. I think it's got like one of those revision stickers on it. I think you can also do like a disc swap. It's admittedly very, very minor, but for any Kubrick title, you know, if it's not 100% perfect, because he was such a perfectionist, you know, you're just like, you want to make sure and try to get it as perfect as possible. So I've got to pick that up. I've been picking up 4K titles here and there as they go on sale and stuff, even though I don't have a 4K panel yet. But I agree, it's a massive improvement, and more is supposed to be following. I think they're going to do The Shining next. That's the one that's suggested. They've apparently had a 4K master of Clockwork Orange available for quite some time, because I think it's gotten shown in some theaters as a DCP. So I'm sure that'll come next, and then maybe Full Metal Jacket, which would be a really easy one to do because they have really great print materials. The last time I saw a print of it last year, and they sent out an original 87 LPP print. It was beautiful with the original mono mix, and hopefully, you know, the original mixes actually keep appearing on the 4K releases, as they should, because they've all been gone. And the one that needs it the most is Eyes Wide Shut. I would absolutely love to see Eyes Wide Shut in 4K, because it looks nothing like its original print run. I always read, you know, how Eyes Wide Shut was so grainy and so beautiful, and deep primary colors and deep black levels and everything. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure it was a bit different, like all of these, but no, it's night and day. The HD master looks nothing like a print of it. And if you ever get the chance to see a print of Eyes Wide Shut, it looks like a completely different movie. It's a totally different experience. I can't emphasize that enough. That's the one out of all of them that needs a new transfer immediately, and hopefully that happens. The disc hubs are awful. Yeah. I'm just amazed that they work for shipping mostly. I know most are foam, some use plastic. I hate those cardboard sleeves though just as much, even though Blu-rays are scratch resistant. I try to avoid those at all costs. And there are some sets where I've seen them release the same titles individually later on with regular cases, and I'm like, oh, I wish I could have gotten that instead. I'm like, should I sell this box set just to get the individual cases? Well, probably not. But man, I wish I'd even be fine with slim cases or just a regular, multi-disc Blu-ray or DVD case like we were doing for a while. What was wrong with that? It worked fine. Why do we want to pay all this money for a brand new disc and get it with scratches right out of the box? But sometimes studios still do okay. But yeah, the sleeve cardboard page book things and the disc hubs, I'm just like, nah, no. Like I said, I have a binder full of DVDs and Blu-rays exclusively from bad packaging, and I keep them in a binder. And so sometimes if I go to a certain thing, I'm like, oh no, I got to go to the binder and flip through it just to get to the specific things. Like I've got my Hitchcock Blu-rays in there, and my Bond Blu-rays from the Bond 50 set, which is awful packaging because the cardboard slots are so narrow. Got my Ten Commandments discs in there, my Ford and Fox discs in there. Things like that. Just like I have the box of Laserdisc box sets that are too big for any shelf, and so they have to be stored separately. So it's like, I'm going through my Disney shelf. I'm like, oh, Fantasia. Oh, wait, no, that's in the box with Dances with Wolves and the other Gigantors. Pete says, Stargate is a great score, but the movie itself is all right. I have to say I had an interesting experience with that. I had never seen it all the way through. I knew of it, and I had friends when I was in middle school who were really big on the SG-1 series, and I saw some of that, and I knew the movie was like the foundation for it, but it was also totally different at the same time. But I gotta say, when I finally sat down and watched Stargate all the way through, I really enjoyed it. It's kind of goofy. It's not perfect. But it's at least trying to trying to do something. And science fiction was really not really well regarded at that point. And the Laserdisc is a good benchmark. It has a fantastic AC3 track, and then you can watch the longer version. I'd love to pick up the longer version on Laserdisc, but it's harder to get. I did get the Blu-ray reissue with both cuts and special features and stuff. I think that has a 7.1 mix on it. I think they tweaked the mix probably a little bit, but that's a really great Blu-ray. It's an upgrade over the older ones with DNR and stuff. So that one you can get for like $5. I do think that's a better movie than it usually gets credit for. I was very pleasantly surprised. Like I said, it's not great or anything, but I really enjoyed it. I'd like to go and check out some of the series at some point. Now that I'm older and I actually know what's going on. But yeah, and I agree the score is actually is really good. That was David Arnold, wasn't it? I think it was Arnold. And I really like Arnold's scores for the most part. I think he may get a little bit too bombastic in certain places. But I do really like his scores for the most part. And of course, I think he's one of the, few modern composers still around that can actually make a good film score. Elvin says that happened to the Sinbad indicator box Wrongmaster used for one of the 3 movies. They fixed starting with 4,000 up to out of the 6,000 units made, and it's now out of print. I remember seeing that announced, and then I remember reading something about that. I don't know too much about those particular films, but anything Indicator does, I just drool over. And then, of course, because they're UK imports, the cost is usually so much that I have to pick and choose. And then by the time I do, it's out of print. And I'm like, oh no, like I really want to get their Hammer boxes. And I don't know if any of them are either close to getting out of print or going out of print, but I'm sure they will. And then they've done a great job at licensing titles and really doing them right. They're doing all the William Castle films. They license those from Sony. They're doing boxes of those, and I really want to get their Westerns box set of the Randolph Scott, Bud Bodeker films that had with some really nice looking restorations in there. That, of course, none of this stuff has made it to U.S. shores. Some of the only ones are in the Sony licensing deal to Mill Creek that come out as cheapo Blu-rays. And Sony started their own manufactured on demand line. they did a bunch of BDRs at first, and I think they're finally switching to press disc. And there's some titles that I really want so badly. Actually reminds me, they came out with the Blu-ray of the Frank Capra classic film Bitter Tea of General Yen, and I want to get it so bad, but it's on a BDR, so it's not a press disc, and it's like $30 or some ridiculous price point. And I'm like, oh, why? They did Capra releases for the main films. They licensed some to Criterion, and none of them cost anywhere near that much. And the only other way to get it is on the DVD, which was in one of those TCM exclusive sets. So the DVD is like $40 with a couple other hard to find Capra titles. So I guess I'm just having to go get the DVD, because I try to avoid manufactured on demand if I can, and I don't want to pay $30 for a BDR, you know. So hopefully somebody else brings it out. Let's see. Ten Commandments still looks fantastic on Blu-ray. Yes, it does. It looks fantastic. The only thing, it doesn't have the original sound mix. It's a remix, but Ten Commandments has had remixes since the Laserdisc era. I think like the first Laserdisc or two has the original audio. I think one like does has it in Dolby Surround, but as far as I know, I think that was pretty much mono, and I think it may have had some like stereo engagements, but I can't be for certain. This division could have stereo engagements, but yeah, I would love to have the original audio mixed with it. That's my one caveat with the release. But that being said, the 5.1 is for the most part fine, and but it's one of those where you just look at it and you're like, wow, this looks like a completely different movie. It's like a revelation. That being said, it almost makes it less of a chore to watch the whole thing, because it's so long, and it's Cecil B. DeMille and his, you know, very oratory period. I've never been a DeMille fan. I appreciate Ten Commandments for the sheer scale of production and everything, but and I love looking at the Blu-ray and stuff. And I have a couple of the Laserdisc, and of course for artistic and importance and film history importance, you know, it's still one of the most financially successful films ever made, especially when inflation adjusted. But yeah, it's definitely not something you can literally just watch when you feel like it, because it is so long and everything. And this says, I'm a bit scared about upgrading. I have limited space, and if I upgrade to 4K, I'll need to either buy a DVD-O for my Laserdisc, or the 4K will have to have the inputs I need. I mean, yeah, that's a legitimate concern. I mean, if this is any indication, I am very space challenged. I have no room for anything, and I've managed to also cram 2 CRTs in here. Yeah, I think you know, you have to really do a lot of research about, you know, what's now referred to as legacy devices, because some TVs, pretty much the Sonys, have maintained having comb filters in them, and they actually have worked to try and make sure that these legacy devices and legacy content will still be viewable, but a lot of models don't. And so that's one part of reviews that really doesn't, very few reviews of television actually discuss that. That being said, the rating site, or it's, I don't know how you pronounce it, but it's rtings.com. They have really detailed television reviews, and they usually do a segment on the upscaling in the television and how it handles DVD, standard def, and composite component sources, stuff like that. And even 720p and 1080p, because that's another concern, because not every 4K panel is the same across the board, and even upscaling HD footage. So yeah, it's a bit of a pickle, and then sometimes you have to have external equipment to process stuff. And then, like you said, if you're space challenged, you got to sit there and try and figure out what's the best option. And to be perfectly frank, I think it's kind of getting to the point where it's like retro gamers who keep around a CRT for retro games, or you know, go out and get professional video monitor, PVM CRT tubes, and use that just for retro games, and then have like a 4K panel for everything else. And like they use a PS4 or Xbox One with a 4K TV or a high-end PC monitor or something. So I think it's honestly getting to that point where it's not a bad idea to just keep 2 monitors around if you can. Either that or go the processing route or the scalar route. But yeah, it's especially harder if you're space challenged. And most of these people are talking about and thinking about, only going back to Blu-ray or maybe even DVD. They're certainly not thinking about those of us Laserdisc enthusiasts, because that's something that most people don't even understand how it works, or that it's composite or anything. And you talk about trying to work with composite sources in the modern era, and they will literally just think you're from another planet. So yeah, you are completely right on that. Elvin says region free is the way to go. Yes. Yes, it is. I thought for the longest time, it'd be really nice, but it's expensive, and there's, eventually everything will make it over here. No, it does not. Region free with Blu-ray is extremely easy. It's not like DVD was, and a lot of region free Blu-ray players are also compliant with being region free for DVD. And if you're lucky enough, you can get one that has internal PAL conversion, so you can watch PAL extras and PAL DVDs and stuff and have it displayable on your NTSC television, because there's a converter inside. So yeah, definitely doable and definitely recommended, because that's the only way to get some really important classic titles, because it's just not available over here, because they only respect films in Europe, because in Europe films are treated as art, and here it's not. And to this day, there's so many classic westerns and classic Hollywood titles that you can get on Blu-ray in France or Germany or the UK or Japan, and or Italy or Spain or whatever, or even Australia, and they're just not here. They're just nowhere. And I'm like, well, that makes no sense. He says, I would love a 4K UHD of The Thing. Blu-ray looks fantastic, but we'll wait for the 4K. Yeah, that's definitely one where, you get into a situation like that, especially from a 4K master. Sometimes you might want to wait because the 4K may be around the corner. Kino says they might do the Dollars trilogy in 4K, so I'm kind of like, should I wait and not get the problematic for a few dollars more and wait until it comes out on 4K with that same disc, or should I go ahead and buy it and have to turn around and get a 4K UHD like 6 months down the road? I don't know. But yeah, unless it's like a limited release, or unless it goes on a big sale or something, for something where there's like a 4K master already around, that's probably a safe bet, because it probably will come out in 4K at some point. But of course, it's going to take the boutique labels a lot longer, because they don't have the resources of the studio. So if it goes on sale, you might as well go ahead and pick it up, I guess. He says, what are your favorite Blu-ray box sets? That's a good question. I mean, there are some, but it seems most Blu-ray box sets are just bundlings of like individual Blu-rays that you get at a discount. There's not a whole lot where it's like really like a solid box set overall that I'm really big on. Like there are some that are great deals. Like I talked about the Planet of the Apes one, because I think that's the best overall quality for the films you can get to date, and you can get it for cheap with the uncut version of Conquest that's exclusive, and the long version of Battle without going for the big Japanese Laserdisc box. But yeah, there doesn't really seem to be the same level of I hate to say hard, but it's not like it was during the DVD era, where as you can see, I've got various box sets that are probably never going to come out on Blu-ray, at least for this time period, like the Errol Flynn westerns and stuff. And then here's the one they did for the Warner Gangsters films that they then released individually, and then this went out of print, and this is supposed to be the first volume of many, and there have never been any more. So there are some that I really like, but then there's so many that are full of problems and things. Like the Hitchcock Universal set is essential for the titles in it, but it's got a lot of problems, and some of the Blu-rays in there are just god awful. The Blu-ray Family Plot is so bad it's worse than the DVD. I'd argue. There are other problems in that set. I have it. You have to have it because it's essential, but it's full of problems. And then there's some that I really like, but again, it's kind of like it's just more packagings of other discs. I know I mentioned the Star Trek Next Gen box set here. I think that's a great example of somebody doing insane levels of detailed work because they had to rebuild each episode from every scrap of negative from scratch to do it in HD. And then all of the special effects had to be recreated in HD because it was all shot on standard def tape. And they did 7.1 audio remixes for every single episode. Also included the original 2.0 audio mixes, tons of extras, and they spent $12 million doing that. And I've heard, they've not yet made their money back yet, but you can get this UK complete series set for a fraction of the cost of the US ones, region-free disc, and it is an amazing amount of work. So in terms of a Blu-ray box set overall, I think this may be it for me because the level of care and detail and work that went into it is insane. And the fact that you can get this for like 50 or 60 bucks is an absolute steal. And I think it's such a great level of work that I don't think it's been matched by a lot of things. And of course, there's things like the Bergman Criterion box that's brand new and looks fantastic. And I'm kind of looking over. I have my separate shelf of like the big oversized Warner everything in the trinket boxes. And I mean, those are nice. The Ten Commandments box is nice with the stone tablets, but of course it kills your disc. In terms of packaging creativity, that's probably up there. I guess overall it would have to be the Lawrence of Arabia box because it's basically Laserdisc size, and it has the exclusive extra Blu-ray with some extra content. And again, it's Laserdisc size, it's beautiful, has the original Lawrence mock-up from the main original one-sheet poster, and that's just a fantastic Blu-ray, and that is the one 4K title that as soon as that comes out, I have to have a 4K panel. Like it has to happen. So as soon as that gets announced, if and when it does, that's the 4K title for me that makes me go out and buy a 4K television like that day, as best as I can possibly afford. So what's this, Ben-Hur, the 1959 version, 4K, the Chariot Race would look awesome. Yes, it would. The Blu-ray is a revelation. The new HD master, I mean, it looks stunning. It's an improvement even over the 4-disc DVD set. The only trouble is, I know some people have wondered if the color is 100% accurate. I think it looks pretty good, but of course I've never seen an original print. But the audio was remixed back in the day, and the new 5.1 HD audio, even though it sounds good, is not like the original 1959 Academy Award winning revolutionary sound mix. So that really needs to be presented. But that being said, the Blu-ray is fantastic. The big Ultimate Collector's box is in one of the, Warner's, trinket box sets, but it's one of the better ones. It's very well packaged. It comes with the original silent version. Unfortunately, it's still in standard def because they didn't restore that in HD. But it's got some really nice extras, and that is a nice box you can get for pretty cheap. But yeah, the Blu-ray is a must-own. I just wish it had the untouched original audio, which is on the Laserdisc, but it's only in Dolby Surround. And I think I may have mentioned this in the last stream, but the Laserdisc of Ben-Hur, even though it's not the full 276, on a good setup, just the standard letterbox one looks amazing for Laserdisc. And then the CAV box, just steps that up a bit more. So I can highly recommend those on Laserdisc, even though you wouldn't think that such an epic large format visual film could look very good on standard def Laserdisc with letterbox bars taking up so much resolution. It really does look good. I was very pleased. I was shocked. I was like, I'm just gonna pick this up for the audio mix. I'm sure the video won't be that good, and it's great. But yeah, the Blu-ray is the best we've ever had for video. Absolutely. Ford Fox box set is the best ever release. Yeah, I wanted to get it for years, and I had some of the smaller DVD versions. I could never afford the big box, and then of course you read about all the people who got defective discs because of the packaging inside and stuff. But if you go to HamiltonBooks.com, they are clearing out ones for it's $40. You can literally get the Ford Fox set for $40. It's $39.99, and their shipping's like $2 or $3. They do tons of Blu-rays now. It's one of the best places to order movies from, and they have tons of great books. And it's like $4 flat rate shipping, I think, for any size order. They've been in business for for ages. They still send out mail catalogs that you can get and read through, and they're absolutely wonderful. Their customer service is great, and they basically get overstock of books primarily, but they started into DVDs. And so I guess somebody's clearing out the 4-Dit Fox boxes, because I saw that pop up. I'm like, wait a minute. And I'm like, I wonder if I should try this, because I'm sure I might get some damaged discs, because I know there's so many problems with the packaging. And I thought about it, and I thought about it some more, and I'm like, well, there's some that are still exclusive to that I really, really want. And of course, the box is beautiful, even though, it's just really super huge for no reason. And so I finally took a chance, and they packaged it extremely well. And of course, some of the discs were a bit scratched, but I tested all of them, and they all tested fine. So it's now in a place of honor on my shelf, because it doesn't fit on any shelf, but I'd say it's a little bit taller than the T2 box and a bit thicker, but that's about the dimension. So it's very Laserdisc-esque, and it's absolutely beautiful. And I haven't got to see all of the exclusive 4 titles in it yet. I think it's like 4, maybe 5 that are only in the box. But yeah, if you guys don't have it yet, go to Hamilton Book. I don't know if they have any more, but they're selling it for $39.99. So you can basically get a film skull in a box for $40. Just be warned, you may get some discs that are shot, because the packaging for the discs is not, shall we say, the greatest. And this is how many discs are included on the TNG set. Does it have the same stuff on the US release? Yes, as far as I know, this is identical in every way. It's region free, but the discs are themselves the same. And basically, this gets everything in a box. It has the I know a lot of people don't like these, but I don't have a problem with them. The big like spindle cases they're using for a lot of TV shows now. And it has all the special features. Again, the discs are the same. I've been rewatching through the whole series. I'm like 3/4 of the way through, and they come in 2 of those spindle cases inside this box. And it's a bit slimmer, and it looks pretty nice on the shelf. In England, they also did the same style box and with matching artwork for the other shows, so you can also get those if you desire and have them all matching. But yeah, it's the same as the US one, and the US one's like normally $120 or something. If it goes on sale, it's like $90. And this goes on sale on Amazon UK all the time, and you can even get copies on eBay. So yeah, it's identical. I think the only thing that the complete sets don't have, I think some of the like standalone show discs have a couple extras. Like there's a couple of the shows that they release as like a standalone Blu-ray where they cut 3 episodes into like a feature thing or something. But those are standalone discs anyway. Says the Planet of the Apes Evolution Collection is only $13.95 for the Blu-ray. Yeah, like I said, Fox has repackaged them so many times, and I think that's one of the ones. Is that one of the ones that has some of the later films? So you can even get it with the later films. So yeah, I just wish they had the original mono for some of them, and they've been rumored to be worked on in 4K. So I hope that actually happens now that Disney owns it. I would just love to see 4K restorations of those with the original mono finally, because the Uncut Conquest is one of the reasons why people should buy a Blu-ray player, I think, because it's so fantastic to finally see with the original ending on it, and that's the only way you can see it. Unfortunately, the mono track on there is the down mix of the 5.1, so it'd be nice to get the 4K Uncut Conquest and Uncut Battle with the original mono tracks. Yeah, all 7. Yep, that's pretty good. I have to say, I don't have the Burton remake, and I hated it in the theater, but I'd like to pick up the Blu-ray at least, simply for the production design and the Rick Baker makeup, which I think is fantastic. Everything else in the film is terrible, I think. And I got Tim Burton started on this whole remake craze, and I'm like, yeah, you don't have any artistic integrity left, do you? But anyway, I'd like to pick that up. I'd like to at least watch it one more time and look at the production design. And I think Baker's makeup was fantastic, and I think that has a significant edge in those terms over the modern ones. I still haven't seen War for the Planet of the Apes, but I saw Rise and I saw Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and I was just like, yeah, no, this stuff was already in the original ones, and I'm not really invested in these. Like the motion capture work, yeah, that's fantastic and is pushing the barrier and everything. I get that, that's fine. But I'm like, yeah, it still for me doesn't have the punch of Roddy McDowell, who does absolutely fantastic work on all the Apes films. Well, except Beneath, because he wasn't in Beneath. But anyway, yeah, it'd be really great to see 4Ks of the original POTA series, so we can all go ape in 4K. That should just be the box. It should just be the Go Ape with all 5 titles in 4K. If you put that somewhere, people would buy it because everybody wants to go ape every once in a while. So I guess, wow, I went longer than I thought I was going to do. I guess, does anybody else have any like other questions or things they want to bring up in the discussion before I call it a night? I will admit Stargate is at least better than most Emmerich movies, but my favorite is Independence Day. Yeah, I'm on board with that. I'm not an Emmerich person. I don't really go for disaster movies, but you know, for what those are, at least they're better than all the really crappy ones, I guess. I've never really been a big Independence Day person, but I've got to pick it up on Laserdisc so I can get my own 2 cents in on the whole AC3 versus DTS versus Blu-ray debate that is going around on LDF and other places. So I am kind of excited to finally rewatch it again because I haven't seen it in years. But yeah, I'd say Stargate's it for me because, like I said, I was very pleasantly surprised that I really liked it. One says there's the Planet of the Apes series from 1975, the cartoon series. Yeah, I've got to see that. I've also got to see the live action television series. I've never seen either. I've seen like stills and read about them, but I've never actually seen them. Got to get around to that. Yeah, I was not like a big POTA fan growing up, but you know, when I actually watched all of them in order and I actually, you know, saw them start to finish because I see pieces of them, you know, I was like, oh, well, the first one was great and all the sequels, you know, had low budgets and you read all the negative stuff about them. But when you actually watch them, it's like, no, these are a lot better than people give them credit for. They're actually about ideas. And, you know, when was the last time you saw a movie about ideas being made, you know? I still think Conquest is right up there with the original. I think Conquest is actually a great film. It defies all the odds. I mean, what other film at that time period was, you know, openly referencing the race riots going on? It's got some staggering work in there, and there's stuff in there that, of course, they toned out of the original release, and thankfully has been restored along with the original intended dark ending. And like I said, I think the original film is a science fiction landmark, and I think Conquest is like right up there with it, even though it's a low budget film shot on the Century City shopping development for no money. But then again, what do I know? I saw Battle for the Planet of the Apes, and I'm like, my God, I actually like Battle for the Planet of the Apes. I always heard it was terrible, and they had a budget of used chewing gum, but I like it. But then again, Conquest and Battle were both directed by J. Lee Thompson, who directed Guns of Navarone and is a great unheralded director. So, you know, a good director can make up for a lot of things, I think. Do you own the Three Stooges Ultimate DVD box? I wish they'd use a hard box for packaging. I've actually been meaning to pick that up, and I've heard about the packaging issues. So I've got to pick that up at some point. And I think there was just a sale on it recently. I think they have repackaged it or like slimmed it down some. I don't know if it's better or not. But I remember when I saw it go on sale, I looked it up, and everybody was talking about like bad packaging on the first one. But yeah, I've got to do that. But again, there's so many different releases I still need. I have too many things, and I never have time to watch anything. But I'm always like, oh man, I need that, and then I look up something about something I don't even have. I'm like, oh crap, I need this, and then, you know, there's a repackage of this, so I'll have to keep an eye out for it. Yeah, slim cases. Slim cases are great. You know, it's maybe a little harder to read the spine, but you know, if you're used to reading Laserdisc spines or record spines on a shelf, that's no problem. And it saves space. So, you know, slim cases are great. Let's not get rid of them. They're much better than hubs, that's for sure. So I guess the only other thing I'll ask is, I know I said this before, but do any of you guys have any interest in me doing some record collecting videos? Just some of highlights and stuff, basically in the style of what I've been doing for my Laserdisc collection, because I'm pretty much wrapped up with those outside of doing new arrival stuff. But okay, cool. Yeah, I just figured I'd throw that out there. Oh yeah, no worries, Pete. Yeah, I had to go through tons of stuff to try and get this setup going. At least it's actually in 16:9 this time. The last time I did it, for some reason, it forced 4:3, and then after I finished, I'm like, wait, what? Why am I in 4:3? I just talked for like 3 hours in 4:3, and I didn't even realize it. But yeah, yeah, no, absolutely soundtracks. I think soundtracks are so overlooked, because you get into a music forum, and everybody's talking about different pressings, and you're like, what's the best version of something, and then you're like, hey, does anybody think there's a good release of the such soundtrack? And you just hear the crickets chirping, and then somebody goes, oh yeah, I love that soundtrack. No, there's not a good version of it. I think you got to get the old LP, and that's it. And I'm like, that's what I figured. Well, and at least there's something, but it's kind of messed up that so many great scores don't have a good release. Like, there's still no good release of the Star Wars score, period. There's no great complete release of the Star Wars trilogy score. How messed up is that? The most recent remastering, which is actually pretty good, is of the LP version, and the 1993 anthology CD box was good. It's not fully complete, but they had some problems with the Empire tapes flaking, so the Empire release on there is not as good as it could be because the tape was damaged. And then the 1997 special edition CDs had more stuff, but they had tons of loudness compression, and they still weren't complete. So to this day, just for an example, there's no great complete release of the Star Wars trilogy score, which is probably the most renowned score there is in this day and age. At least it's something everybody knows. So you'd think there'd be a complete release of that sounded halfway decent, but there isn't, because it's Star Wars and nothing can be good and perfect. Yeah, I was just curious to get some feedback. So yeah, I think that's what I'll move into next, because I can pretty much use the same setup, because I finally figured out how to get stuff and have it visible and not have a ton of glare and stuff. I know I spent hours and days like tweaking just a little cheap setup just to make sure I could have Laserdisc visible without getting glare, and moving my lights around and everything. So that's good. I definitely should do that then as my next series of videos, since I've reached the end of Laserdom for the time being. But yeah, so that's all I've got. Does anybody have anything else before I wrap this up? Oh no, thank you. Absolutely, yeah. No, this was a great discussion. I never thought I'd be going this long when I started doing these. It was kind of a lark, because I got inspired by Culture Dogs. So I'm just glad to chat with everybody, and I just didn't expect that these would go for 3 hours. That's cool. Just happy to get any kind of feedback. All right. Well, I guess if anybody has anything else, you can put some more comments on the regular video, and I'll answer those. So I'm going to call it a night. Thanks so much, everybody. And oh yeah, absolutely 4K. No trouble at all. This is always a pleasure for me. It's just nice to be able to talk to people and not get blank stares, and feel like I'm talking gobbledygook or a foreign language, because that's like 99.9% of every day for me. But yeah, so I don't quite know if I'm going to have this as a weekly thing like Culture Dog does, but I'd like to do it pretty regularly. So it would probably flip between Mondays and Tuesdays. Those are usually my best days for doing stuff. But yeah, pretty much same time as this, stuff like that. But yeah, so any other questions or anything, just leave a comment below. I'm also on Facebook in the groups. You can always find me, or if you want to send me a friend request, no trouble at all. So all right, I'm going to call it a night, guys. Thanks for another great chat, and hope to have another one soon. Night all, and happy laser hunting.